Have you ever caught yourself nodding along, even as your chest pounded with panic? Imagine a spider spinning silk from your every yes, weaving a web that binds your will until you cannot move in any direction. A friend asks you to cover a shift at work. A colleague demands extra hours. A relative guilt trips you into caretaking. Each time you agree, the web tightens, constricting your choices until refusal feels impossible. Saying no becomes a phantom that vanishes the moment it rises on your lips. From the moment you learn to speak, social conditioning teaches that politeness is paramount and refusal is taboo. Conflict is a word you come to fear. You avoid the awkwardness of disagreement as if silence were sacred. You swallow your discomfort to maintain a fragile harmony, convinced that a single no could fracture relationships or strip you of belonging. The more you sacrifice your own boundaries, the more you internalize the belief that your desires are secondary and your autonomy negotiable. Guilt creeps in like a silent toxin when you contemplate refusal. A plea wrapped in sorrow or implied suffering can paralyze your resolve. Phrases like "I really need you" or "I don't know how I'll manage without your help" invade your thoughts. Suddenly you are no longer refusing a task, you are sentencing someone to suffering. So you comply, hoping guilt will abate, not realizing that your compassion becomes the very trap that ensnares you. Small acts of kindness trigger an unseen ledger of obligation. A compliment, a gift, a favor, your mind immediately begins tallying. Reciprocity, the unspoken rule of human exchange, demands balance. Denying the next request feels like betrayal, not only of the other person, but of your own sense of fairness. It seems easier to agree than to face the weight of unspoken debt. Scarcity fuels your fear of refusal. Opportunities appear fleeting and golden. Invitations to events, exclusive insights, promises of advancement all feel like lifelines. Refusing one might mean fading into obscurity. The discomfort of saying no is eclipsed by the dread of missing out on something you might never see again. Your self-image becomes hostage to your own generosity. You want to believe you are kind, reliable, indispensable. Saying no threatens that carefully constructed identity. Beneath every series of yes lies the fear of being unwanted, outcast, or judged as selfish. And so you maintain the facade of endless compliance, convinced that your value rises with every borrowed favor you never repay. When authority laces a request, refusal edges into defiance. Bosses, parents, experts, figures cloaked in power blur the line between ask and order. Obedience is ingrained as the path of least resistance. Saying no suggests you lack respect or discipline, and so you yield, mistaking hierarchical pressure for genuine need. Social proof whispers in your ear, if no one else refuses, neither can you. You scan the room and see nods of agreement plastered on every face. To diverge feels like stepping off a cliff, alone. Belonging outweighs personal conviction, and so the crowd carries you forward on its tide. When your actions conflict with your beliefs, your mind bends to restore harmony. Cognitive dissonance tightens a silent knot in your thoughts, coaxing you to rewrite your own intentions. You convince yourself you wanted to agree all along. The memory of your resistance softens until you cannot even recall why you resisted in the first place. Emotional blackmail is a nightly ritual in many relationships. A partner's silence, a parent's disappointment, a close friend's tears all become weapons that pressure you into compliance. Saying no feels like abandoning love itself. You cling to yes as a shield against the pain of withdrawal, oblivious to the way it feeds the very manipulator who wields your guilt against you. Often it is the steady avalanche of small requests that buries your capacity for refusal. One after another they fall. Return this call, fix this issue, attend that gathering, accommodate this preference. Each feels benign in isolation, but collectively they overwhelm. Your will is not so much broken as slowly eroded by the relentless tide of demands. When you cannot say no, you surrender more than your time and energy. You surrender your agency, your focus, even your sense of self. You become predictable, a resource tapped at will. Invisible chains bind you without your awareness until you wonder how you arrived at a life crafted by someone else's desires. Liberation begins in the act of pausing. Notice the triggers: guilt, reciprocity, scarcity, authority, social proof, cognitive dissonance, emotional coercion, exhaustion. Feel the moment your instinct to refuse rises before you override it with automatic agreement. Breathe, acknowledge your own needs, and find the courage to choose. Saying no is not rude. Saying no is an act of fierce self-respect. Because when you cannot say no, you become the puppet and your strings are pulled by every demand you cannot resist. Reclaiming the power to refuse is the first step toward breaking free of the silent control twisting your life into someone else's design. But what if every ticking second became a crack in your will, poised to shatter you under the pressure of an unseen clock with no escape? Have you ever watched the seconds drip like molten lead, knowing each one pulls you closer to a point of no return? You're staring at a half-finished document, the cursor blinking with mocking precision, while the world outside your window carries on in oblivion. Inside your skull, panic coils like a venomous snake, squeezing every thought into a knot of dread. 20 minutes to deadline becomes 10, becomes 5, until time ceases to feel like a resource and starts to feel like an executioner. Your palms sweat, your chest constricts, and every key you strike feels heavy, as though your fingers are moving through water. In that moment, the simplest decision transforms into a life or death choice. You chase missing words, stumble over half-formed ideas, and feel yourself slipping into desperation, grasping for clarity that won't come. When that desperation grips you, it is not just an emotion but a biochemical storm. Adrenaline surges, sharpening your focus into a narrow beam that blinds you to everything but the task at hand. Cortisol floods your bloodstream, hijacking memory and creativity until they lie dormant, leaving only a feral urge to finish. Dopamine teases you with fleeting glimmers of satisfaction whenever you complete even the smallest fragment of work, luring you deeper into the cycle. Your prefrontal cortex, the seat of planning and judgment, is pushed offline, and you become a reactive machine, lurching from one move to the next without reflection. You gulp down coffee or energy drinks, hoping to fuel your mind, but each hit only fans the flames of stress, locking you into a chemical siege you can't break. In that state, your vision collapses into a tunnel where the margins, the nuance, the context all vanish like shadows at dusk. Emails from colleagues morph into distracting noise, the subtle tone of a sentence, the careful crafting of an argument, the insight that emerges in quiet revision, all slip through your fingers. You plow ahead, eyes fixed on the finish line, ignoring the twists and turns that lead to depth and originality. Mistakes multiply because there is no room for fresh thought or deliberate choices. By the time you reach the end, you may find you sprinted toward the wrong goal, sacrificing quality for speed and meaning for immediacy. And that cost can echo long after the clock stops. Under that pressure, ethics feel like a luxury you cannot afford. You start to justify cutting corners as necessary sacrifices, skipping citations, glossing over data inconsistencies, bypassing critical reviews. You whisper to yourself that these shortcuts are harmless, temporary deviations in the pursuit of survival. In a newsroom, it spawns half-truths. In marketing, it spawns empty promises. In everyday work, it becomes borrowing a colleague's words or bending rules just once. Each small betrayal chips away at your self-respect until integrity becomes an afterthought. When the crisis passes, you discover that your moral compass has slipped, and the person you thought you were has dissolved into expedience. Then comes the aftermath. You submit your work, collapse in relief, and expect calm to arrive. Instead, a hollow emptiness greets you as the adrenaline crash sets in. Sleep evades you as your mind replays every misstep, every awkward turn of phrase, every moment lost to indecision, every opportunity you failed to seize. Regret coils around your heart like a tire iron, and self-doubt creeps in, whispering that you're not good enough, not fast enough, not worthy of trust. Simple tasks become fraught with anxiety. Collaboration feels perilous. Every new deadline carries the weight of past failures, priming you for the next wave of panic. Then strangely, you begin to crave that frenzy, associating chaos with achievement, wearing stress like a badge of honor, even as it eats you from the inside. Worst of all, deadlines forge invisible chains. You learn to crave the rush, believing that you do your best work only under duress. Managers and clients sense your dependence on urgency and dole out pressing demands at a moment's notice, secure in the knowledge that you will deliver. You call it agility, your body calls it chronic stress. Over time, you forget what calm focus feels like. Every quiet moment is haunted by the specter of the next countdown, every breath tinged with dread. You mistake burnout for dedication, exhaustion for passion. You no longer direct your time, it directs you. And in that sacrifice of autonomy, you lose a piece of yourself, becoming a creature trained to dance on the edge of collapse, forever tethered to the rhythm of the ticking clock. And when the last echo of urgency fades, a guilt you can't shake will begin its silent assault. Picture yourself lying awake in the dead of night, eyes fixed on a worn ceiling, mind replaying a single moment. A mistake you made, a word you whispered, an action you wish you could erase. That dull ache in your chest is guilt. It presses down, refusing to let you breathe freely, even when daylight arrives. You tell yourself it's gone, but in the silence of your thoughts, guilt still lingers. Why does it refuse to fade? You fill your days with noise, endless scrolling, urgent tasks, small anxieties, but guilt slips past every distraction. It hides in the pauses between your sentences, in the quiet after a laugh, in the hollow space beneath your confidence. Guilt is an echo that follows you everywhere, a reminder that whatever you did or failed to do defines you more than any compliment or apology ever could. Guilt evolved as an internal compass, guiding us to repair broken bonds and uphold trust. It whispers warnings, make amends, or face isolation. But today, guilt is a tool. It's wielded by voices that know how to cut deep. Friends, lovers, bosses, advertisers, even your own mind. They twist that ancient compass, making you doubt your worth and bend to their will. In the wrong hands, guilt becomes a lever of control. Remember when you lied to a friend to avoid confrontation. The lie felt small in the moment, almost inconsequential. But later, you felt your stomach tighten whenever their name appeared on your phone. That small deception dug a trap in your mind. You apologized, they forgave, but your guilt kept whispering that you were a fraud, untrustworthy, weak, unworthy of their trust. You couldn't shake it because guilt doesn't care about rational explanations. In relationships, guilt operates like a hidden leash. If you loved me, you'd. These three words can shatter your resistance. Suddenly, you're apologizing for trivial things, forgetting a date, saying no to a favor, spending time away. You feel a pang in your chest, a need to prove your devotion at any cost. Love shouldn't feel like a debt, but guilt transforms affection into obligation, and obligation into quiet servitude. Family ties are fertile ground for guilt. After all I've done for you, they say, every help rendered turned into ammunition. A ride home, a loan, a simple favor. Suddenly you owe a lifelong debt upon which they draw endlessly. You begin to measure every decision against the unspoken ledger of favors. You yearn for freedom, but guilt holds you hostage, reminding you that loyalty demands repayment you can never complete. At work, guilt whispers that every minute off is stolen time. You promise to send one more email, to handle one more call, to sacrifice another weekend. Coworkers nod appreciatively, managers recognize dedication, but inside you feel depleted. Guilt for leaving tasks unfinished, guilt for taking breaks, guilt for valuing your life outside the office. Productivity becomes a chain around your ankles, and guilt the ball that weighs you down. Advertising knows your soft spot. Images of emaciated children, oil-slicked birds, starving wildlife. They prey on your compassion and then demand your wallet. You click donate now, hoping relief follows your kindness, but that guilt never fully fades. Another ad appears. You bought one product, but guilt whispers you didn't do enough. The cycle repeats. Give, feel relief. See another plea, feel guilt, give again. Guilt becomes a subscription you can't cancel. Politics weaponizes guilt too. Posters scream, support the troops, or hate our country. Vote now, or betray democracy, tapping into your fear of being unloved by your own society. You cast ballots, speak approved phrases, and still feel the tug of guilt when you doubt the cause. Dissent feels disloyal, curiosity feels unpatriotic. Guilt silences conversation and creates silent majorities too afraid to ask real questions. Then there's the guilt you inflict on yourself. The perfectionist's heartbeat quickens at every tiny mistake. You replay your flaws like an unforgiving jury. Late for an appointment becomes proof of irresponsibility, a missed workout, a sign of weakness. You internalize every failure until guilt becomes your constant companion. You don't need external manipulation. Your own mind punishes you just fine, crueler than any critic. Guilt isn't abstract. It manifests physically: nausea, headaches, restless nights. You awaken at 3 a.m., mind spinning through regrets like a broken record. You feel your chest tighten, your breath shorten, your pulse race. It's like a phantom injury, no wound, but the pain is real. Your body reads guilt as threat, flooding you with stress hormones that keep you locked in survival mode. Over time, guilt forms a loop. Shame follows guilt, guilt follows shame. You feel flawed, less than, and then guilty for feeling flawed. That self-reinforcing cycle crushes confidence and erodes resilience. You start to avoid risks, dodge challenges, shrink away from possibilities. Guilt becomes a silent prison, the bars formed by your own self-doubt and the comforting lie that you deserve this suffering. Cults of personality, even social media tribes, all use guilt as their secret weapon. They tell you you'll be lost without us. You owe your success to our guidance. Your loyalty justifies our demands. Pushback becomes betrayal. Curiosity becomes heresy. Leaving means doom. Guilt binds you to the group, to the narrative, to the promise of belonging. Abandon the group, and guilt promises the pain of isolation. Breaking free begins when you recognize guilt's patterns. Notice that tightness in your chest, the repetitive thoughts, the instant shame reflex. Ask yourself, whose voice is this? Is this feeling protecting me or controlling me? Naming it removes its power. Acknowledging the trigger gives you a choice. Respond out of fear or choose compassion instead. Awareness cracks the mirror of guilt, shattering its deceptive hold. Self-forgiveness is radical. It's saying, I did my best with the tools I had. It's a promise to learn rather than languish in regret. It doesn't erase mistakes. It reframes them as part of your humanity. You allow yourself to feel regret without being defined by it. You accept that healing requires compassion more than punishment. In that space, guilt loses its grip and becomes a teacher instead of a jailer. Guilt is a switch that flips to enforce behavior, to keep you in line with someone else's agenda, even your own self-criticism. It binds you to past actions and robs you of presence. But guilt itself is not your enemy. It's a messenger. When you look beyond the pain and listen for the lesson, you reclaim your power. Awareness transforms guilt from a chain into a compass, guiding you toward growth and authentic freedom. But what happens when praise becomes a trap? The next segment will reveal why a single compliment hooks you in ways you never imagined. Imagine you're sitting alone at your desk, head buried in reports, when suddenly a voice cuts through the monotony. You handled that presentation brilliantly. You look up, momentarily stunned by the unexpected praise. Your heart quickens, shoulders relax. A warmth spreads from your chest into your limbs. Why do a few simple words feel like a lifeline thrown into a stormy sea? Why does a single compliment hook you so deeply that you replay it on loop in your mind all day? Because compliments aren't just pleasant niceties, they're carefully crafted triggers that hijack your brain's reward circuitry. When you hear praise, your neurons fire off dopamine, that same chemical that lights up when you win a prize or score a victory in a game. You feel it as a tiny surge of joy, a rush that promises more of the same. And like any addict, you begin craving the next hit, the next moment of recognition, the next affirmation that you matter. Not all praise is equal. A generic good job slides off like water on glass. But a personalized compliment that names your effort, your unique strength, that feels like someone reached inside your mind and saw your true self. That kind of praise resonates at the core of your identity. It's intimate, it's revealing. It feels like permission to be yourself fully, to step into the role you secretly hoped you could play. And here lies the secret weapon, vulnerability. By targeting what you most want to believe about yourself, a compliment softens your defenses. Your guard drops. Suddenly, you're receptive to ideas, to requests, to suggestions. That moment of openness is a doorway. Marketers, leaders, even social manipulators know this instinctively. They use praise as a Trojan horse, slipping in messages you'd normally resist because you trust the voice that saw you, applauded you. Consider how brands whisper your name in their ads. A luxury label tells you your style is impeccable. A fitness coach assures you that your potential is limitless. These messages feel personal, even though they're broadcast to millions. They're designed to make you feel seen, chosen, special. The moment you accept that whisper, you're primed to buy, to follow, to commit. You aren't just consuming a product, you're consuming the narrative that you deserve it. In relationships, compliments become even more potent. Early on, you might be showered with admiration and adoration. Every glance, every laugh, every detail about you is magnified and celebrated. This feels intoxicating, like the world finally broke its silence and put a spotlight on you. But too often, this is the prelude to the trap. Compliments turn into expectations. Love bombing slowly morphs into control. You learn to crave approval, to chase the next burst of praise, even when the cost is your own boundaries. And the way compliments are dispensed matters. A steady stream of bland approval becomes wallpaper. But an unpredictable, variable schedule of praise, sometimes lavish, sometimes sparse, creates a psychological itch you can't ignore. Just like gambling, you fixate on that big win, that overwhelming flood of adulation. It's not the pleasant moments you remember most, it's the scarcity that amplifies every kind word into something precious. This power of praise builds on a deeper urge, the need to belong. You want your self-image confirmed. You want the world to nod at who you believe you are. A compliment that aligns with your internal narrative becomes irresistible. It reinforces your beliefs about your talents, your value, your worth. And once that alignment is struck, you're locked into a feedback loop. You seek only the praise that echoes your self-perception, ignoring anything that might challenge it. But it's not just about feeling good, it's about response. Hearing praise puts you in debt. You feel an almost unconscious need to reciprocate, an impulse to return the favor, to comply with a request, to join a cause. It's the reciprocity principle in action. You've been given something, so you owe something back. Subtly, you find yourself saying yes to things you'd otherwise refuse because you don't want to risk losing that warm glow of approval. Even online communities exploit this. A compliment buried in a comment thread, a shout-out in a live chat, a badge or title that celebrates your contributions, all of these inject the same chemical jolt of praise. You stick around, participate more, share opinions multiple times, engage in debates you don't really care about. All for that sweet moment when someone clicks like or says you're amazing. You become a puppet dancing to the tune of applause. Awareness is your first defense. Once you see how praise is wielded, you can pause before leaning into it. You can ask yourself, who benefits from my desire to feel special? Who gains my attention, my loyalty, my energy? Not every compliment is a manipulation, but every compliment is an opportunity. And in that moment of openness, someone else might be planting a seed that grows into control. Yet, even armed with knowledge, resisting the pull isn't easy. Compliments feel good. They restore confidence. They ease doubt. They remind you that beneath the noise and the chaos, someone saw your effort and cared. That sensation is powerful. It's human. And it's woven into the very fabric of how you connect with others, how you learn, how you grow. The trick isn't to avoid compliments, it's to choose which ones you accept and to question what you do in response. A single compliment can be a gentle gift or a subtle leash. It can brighten your day or hook you into someone else's agenda. It can open you to deeper connection or trap you in debt you never noticed accumulating. You might think praise is harmless, even desirable, but the truth is that the same softness that welcomes it also leaves you exposed. And when exposure turns into exploitation, you'll only realize it when the warmth fades and you're left wondering how you got there. But what truly grips you is not the praise itself, but the silent terror of missing out on belonging. A fear far more controlling. Imagine your phone lighting up at 2 in the morning. A group chat alert, a live broadcast just starting, an invitation to an event you only heard existed seconds ago. You're half asleep, adrenaline spiking, heart thudding, yet you swipe up, unable to resist. That moment when you fear you might miss something crucial. This is where FOMO begins. Fear of missing out isn't just a fleeting worry, it's a silent puppeteer. It tugs at your attention, steers your choices, and rewrites your priorities. You believe you're chasing excitement or connection, but you're really fleeing regret, the dread of looking back at your life and realizing you stood on the sidelines. Human survival depended on belonging to the group. Inclusion brought safety, exclusion meant vulnerability. That primal instinct still pulses in your brain. When you see others sharing experiences you're not part of, an alarm goes off. Suddenly, belonging feels not optional, but necessary, and the fear of solitude gnaws at your confidence. Social media weaponizes this instinct. Stories that vanish after 24 hours, live streams that demand your immediate attention. Limited time offers flashing across screens, each feature engineered to create artificial scarcity, an illusion that if you don't act now, the chance evaporates forever. You feel the pressure to jump in before the clock runs out. Every notification is a small reward, a hit of dopamine. You scroll, you refresh, hoping for that next hit. But the rush never lasts. Instead, it transforms into yearning, a craving that pulls you deeper into the endless cycle. You chase the high, but the more you seek, the less you find. You avoid missing out because the thought of regret feels punishing. You'd rather fill every moment, attend every event, than face the possibility of looking back and wishing you had. Regret, you believe, is a harsher sentence than exhaustion. So you press on, busy and breathless, to escape that sense of loss. Marketers understand this perfectly. They flood you with images of perfect vacations, sold-out concerts, exclusive gatherings, carefully curated snapshots designed to make you feel inferior, a spectator peering through a window at other people's lives. That ache in your chest. It's the engine that drives you to chase an ever-moving target. You've clicked on flash sales for items you barely need, simply because a timer counted down. You've signed up for online courses you never start, desperate not to miss the once-in-a-lifetime deal. Each impulse decision offers a momentary rush, followed by emptiness. FOMO profits from that emptiness, encouraging you to chase the next false promise. Think of the secret gathering text you once received. You dropped your plans, cancelled commitments, racing to be there on time. You arrived to an empty venue or a stranger's crowded party, lost in a sea of unfamiliar faces. That hollow feeling wasn't coincidence, it was FOMO's trap, designed to keep you seeking belonging, any belonging. Social FOMO makes you overcommit. You attend meetings, parties, network events you'd rather skip. You force smiles, pretend to care, while your mind drifts to the next invite. You become a passenger in your own life, nodding politely as you tally how many groups you haven't yet joined and how long before you fall behind again. Even your career isn't safe. You sign up for every webinar, summit, certification, terrified of being left behind. You collect credentials like trophies, stacking them higher, without ever pausing to apply what you've learned. The chase for professional relevance leaves you a perpetual student, exhausted and unfulfilled, always one step behind yourself. The emotional toll is relentless. Anxiety coils in your chest like a tightening spring. Your focus fractures into fragments, scattered across feeds and notifications. You become a spectator, always anticipating the next alert, never fully present. FOMO fractures your attention, shredding the fabric of your daily life into 1,000 restless pieces. Groupthink is FOMO's close companion. You adopt every trending opinion, join each viral debate, like to show approval or outrage, afraid of being silenced or ignored. Your beliefs shift with the winds of social media, tethered to the dread of exclusion. In that whirlwind, your own convictions vanish, replaced by a borrowed chorus. Ethical corners get cut when acceptance outweighs authenticity. You share headlines without reading them, spouting slogans you don't believe, just to fit in. You silence doubts to protect your social standing. In that bargain, you lose your own voice, trading truth for applause again and again, until you barely recognize the person in the mirror. FOMO exposes a stark reality. Your life is guided not by your inner compass, but by blinking signals demanding your attention. You hand over control of your time, your focus, your values to algorithms and fleeting trends. When you live chasing what's next, you lose sight of what's now, blurring the line between desire and need. But every fear contains a choice. Missing out can be an act of liberation. By refusing to chase every lure, you reclaim space to think, rest, and create. You trade the frantic scramble for a slower rhythm, discovering depth in absence and meaning in stillness. The absence of noise invites your own voice to emerge. Embrace JOMO, the joy of missing out. It's not resignation, but rebellion against the tyranny of everywhereness. Choosing absence becomes an act of rebellion, a declaration of self-priority. You let go of the fear of being forgotten and instead celebrate the freedom of selective presence, valuing quality of experience over quantity of events. Mindfulness becomes your shield. Before you swipe, before you RSVP, pause and ask, why am I doing this? Notice the pull of FOMO and let it pass, like a breath in meditation. Each conscious choice rebuilds your agency, restoring control over where you place your attention and what you let shape your life. When you reclaim absence, you discover presence. You find meaning in unhurried moments, clarity instead of chaos, connection instead of comparison. You learn that true belonging arises within, not from endless invitations. By breaking free from FOMO's grip, you step back into your own life, guided by your own priorities, not by the next blinking notification. Next, discover why you follow the crowd blindly, even when its pull might lead you straight off the edge of reason. You step into a crowd, and suddenly your steps mirror theirs. You adjust your pace, your gaze, your opinions, all without conscious thought. It's as if an invisible hand guides you, nudging you toward the same choices, the same beliefs, the same fate. Have you ever caught yourself agreeing with a point of view simply because everyone around you did? You might not even understand the argument, yet you find your voice rising in unison. The strange comfort of agreement lures you into a dangerous trance. Evolution wired you for safety in numbers. Our ancestors survived by sticking together, following the leader, trusting the group's instincts. But that ancient wiring doesn't distinguish between wise guidance and mindless conformity. Imagine scanning a row of restaurants and choosing the busiest one, assuming crowds equal quality. You follow the sign above the door made of people, not merit. You trust the crowd more than your own taste. What if most diners have no idea what they ordered? What if they're just chasing someone else's approval? You'd still follow them, because conceding to the majority feels easier than standing alone. You fear exclusion more than error. The thought of being the odd one out churns anxiety in your gut. Better to hide your doubts, swallow your objections, and drift with the tide than risk being cast ashore. Psychologists have demonstrated this in stark experiments. In one study, people willingly denied obvious truths just because others insisted. They looked you in the eye and said 3 lines were the same length, and you nodded along. Now imagine voicing the lone dissenting opinion. The walls close in, eyes glare, Silence hangs heavy. Dissent feels like a spotlight on your isolation, and so you swallow the truth. Consider political rallies where thousands chant the same slogans. The roar of voices drowns out reason. You feel swept up, carried forward by the momentum of collective emotion rather than personal conviction. Online, the effect is amplified. You like a post because everyone else does. A flurry of thumbs and hearts tells you what to think before you even read the words. Your mind becomes a mirror, reflecting digital applause. With every notification ping, you crave more validation. Dopamine surges with each retweet or share. You chase the high of belonging, oblivious to the chains you weave around your own mind. Fear of missing out tightens its grip. You scroll endlessly, convinced you'll stumble on the conversation that defines the moment. You join in, not because you care, but because you cannot bear to be left behind. Your mind becomes an echo chamber, filled with recycled opinions. Original thought is muffled by the uniform sound of consensus. You mistake the cacophony of agreement for truth, losing the ability to hear your own voice. Retail environments guide you with subtle signs. A gold sticker, branded customer favorite, or a chalkboard reading staff, transforms an unknown item into a must-have. You trust the invisible crowd's choice more than your own curiosity. In theaters, applause leaps from one patron to the next. You might not know why they're clapping, but you join anyway. Silence feels awkward, so you clap, your hands echoing the rhythm chosen by strangers. Your earliest lessons in fitting in begin in the playground. You traded snacks because friends did, laughed at jokes you didn't find funny, cheered for games that bored you. Peer pressure is the first form of crowd control you ever learned. Advertising amplifies the herd instinct. Millions sold to viral sensations. Everyone's talking about it. These phrases manufacture an audience. You mimic their behavior, buying what they bought, because belonging seems safer than standing apart. In markets, this becomes disastrous. Investors pour money into rising stocks, not because of fundamentals, but because others do. Bubbles inflate on collective delusion until they burst, dragging everyone down. You define yourself through the crowd. Your beliefs, your style, even your fears are borrowed. The crowd offers identity wrapped in the comfort of familiarity, and breaking away feels like erasing yourself. Group consensus doesn't just shape your actions, it silences your objections. You question less because the price of speaking up feels too high. The crowd's invisible rule is simple: conform or be punished. When the crowd turns violent, you join too. Mob mentality corrodes moral boundaries. Ordinary people unleash cruelty because they feel protected by numbers, convinced their wrongdoing is justified by collective will. You rationalize the crowd's verdict. You assume that if everyone else agrees, they must be right. You abandon critical thought, handing over responsibility to an unseen majority. This illusion has a name: pluralistic ignorance. Everyone believes they alone see the truth, yet nobody speaks up. The silence of the few empowers the conformist rule of the many. Breaking free demands brutal honesty. Awareness of these forces is your first act of rebellion. You must train your mind to notice the tug of the herd, to pause, to question, and to stand your ground. Yet resisting comes at a price. The weight of social pressure, the fear of isolation, the cognitive strain of independent thought, it's exhausting. Your instincts scream to blend back in. In that moment, you realize the choice to follow has always been yours. Yet your instincts betray you, binding you to the will of strangers. Imagine that same instinct to follow, now tied to a crisp uniform and an emblem you're taught to respect. Imagine yourself stepping onto a silent platform under dim lights, your footsteps echoing against cold concrete. Then you see him, a figure in crisp uniform, polished badge catching the glow of the overhead lamp. Instantly, your heart shifts gear, questions vanish. Your feet carry you forward without thought. You trust him. You must. Because the uniform speaks before he does, announcing authority, competence, safety. That garment, stitched with insignia and stripes, is more than cloth. It is a language woven in confidence. You barely notice the patterns, the precise cut, the way the collar stands firm. Your brain sees those symbols and summons a rush of automatic trust. Your pulse steadies. Your defenses fold inward. The uniform becomes an invisible command, whispering, "You can rely on me." Have you ever wondered why a simple change of clothes can override every doubt? In a second, you hand over your questions, your caution, your autonomy. A doctor's coat demands you believe in healing hands. A police officer's badge demands you believe in justice. A pilot's stripes demands you believe in safe passage. You don't weigh credentials or question motives. You surrender. Uniform demands trust. This isn't mere habit. It's hardwired. From tribal warriors painted in ritual garb to modern forces clad in tailored uniforms, humans have always followed the signals of affiliation. We evolved to seek leaders whose attire marks them as insiders. Deep in your mind, you remember cloaked figures once guided your survival. Today, the uniform triggers the same instinct, bypassing thought and plucking the strings of obedience. Picture a paramedic kneeling beside a stranger on the pavement. Before you even process the severity of the injury, you feel relief. That kaleidoscope of red and white stripes, those reflective patches, they promise help. You exhale. You trust the uniform to heal, to save. You don't pause to wonder if those hands are steady or if the diagnosis is sound. You simply believe. And yet, that same power can imprison you. In every era, uniforms have demanded not only trust, but unquestioning obedience. Think of the black-clad enforcers of totalitarian regimes marching through silent streets under orders you dare not question. Their garments became symbols of fear and compliance. You obey, not because you believe in the cause, but because the uniform brooks no dissent. Criminals know this too. They slip into knockoff uniforms, borrow credibility, and villains masquerade as saviors. A phony officer at your door, a fake inspector in your home, each exploits the same instinct. You let them in, you follow their script. Because you trust the uniform, you open gates you'd otherwise bolt. Fabric becomes the ultimate con artist, granting access to hearts and homes alike. Why does this terrify you? Because uniform bypasses the most precious part of your mind, your judgment. It reduces complexity to a symbol. Instead of asking who this person is, you see what they wear. Trust becomes a reflex. Obedience becomes easier than thought. Your autonomy erodes in service to a stitched-on emblem. So what does it say about you that you trust fabric more than your own instincts? That a simple stitch can command your loyalty, command your silence, command your life. Uniform isn't innocent. It's a tool, wielded by institutions and individuals alike, to harness your deepest instincts without your awareness. It demands faith. It demands obedience. It demands surrender. Now pause and feel the weight of that revelation settle in your chest. The uniform you revere could be a costume, a trap, a catalyst for compliance you never intended. Your trust, traded for a few threads of cloth, is a price far greater than you imagine. And next, you'll discover how a small gift can quietly buy your loyalty and chain you even tighter than any uniform. Imagine you're at work after a grueling morning, your mind foggy from back-to-back calls. A colleague appears with a porcelain cup, steam curling in the air, a rich aroma of espresso that instantly cuts through your fatigue. You smile and accept it gratefully, but there's more than caffeine in that cup. Beneath the surface of that simple gesture lies a powerful force, one that binds you closer than you realize. The moment you cradle the warm mug, you feel an unexpected flicker of obligation. It's not discomfort exactly, but a subtle tug at your conscience. You catch yourself thinking you should do something in return. Maybe cover their shift next week, or agree to their suggestion, even if you wouldn't otherwise. This tingling sense of indebtedness is proof that small kindnesses can carry invisible expectation. This effect is rooted in one of our oldest social rules, reciprocity. Across cultures and centuries, humans have learned that gifts and favors create ties, weaving a fabric of mutual obligation. As hunter-gatherers, offering the first share of food meant survival. Today, sending someone a small token still triggers that ancestral instinct to balance the scales. An instinct so deep it often operates beneath your awareness. Picture yourself strolling through a supermarket aisle. A promoter hands you a toothpick-pierced cube of cheese. The savory flavor explodes in your mouth, and suddenly you're reaching for more. Your taste buds and your social brain join forces, nudging you toward the product. You didn't set out to buy cheese, but that tiny sample hooked your attention and your sense of fairness, making you feel worthy of a purchase. Then there are the non-profits that send you 3 shiny address labels in the mail. You didn't ask for them, but you can't ignore them either. Almost against your will, you peel one off and stick it onto an envelope and consider a small donation. That innocent label has done its job. It created a silent contract. They gave you something, so now you owe something back. Corporations know this trick all too well. They hand out branded pens, coffee mugs, or USB drives at events. That plastic logo, emblazoned on the pen, transforms into a reminder of your unwitting promise. You may not realize you're doing it, but somewhere in your mind you've agreed to listen, to stay, to consider their pitch when they follow up, because humans hate to leave debts unpaid. But it's not just customers and companies. Friends and acquaintances use the same subtle lever. A birthday card arrives in the mail with a small gift card. You're grateful, of course, but you also find yourself nodding along to their plans, maybe agreeing to help move furniture or to support their fundraiser. That tiny gift is a psychological anchor, securing your loyalty where it might not naturally lie. The beauty and danger of this trigger is its invisibility. You think you're making free choices, but every gesture nudges you an inch toward compliance. You feel in control until you pause to ask yourself why you accepted an invitation you never wanted. By then, the net of obligation is already tightening, holding you in place before you even notice your own willingness to comply. In some societies, gift-giving follows elaborate rituals. In Japan, homage creates bonds of respect and gratitude. In the Middle East, coffee and dates seal business deals. Those traditions can foster genuine connection, but they also show how the principle scales. When every gift conceals unspoken expectations, the lines blur. Acts of courtesy become instruments of influence, and recipients learn to give back automatically to maintain harmony. Imagine you're in a posh boardroom and the CEO places a sleek leather notebook on the table in front of you. Embossed with their company's crest, it feels luxurious. You didn't need a new notebook, but now you feel compelled to use it and to remember whose name is on the cover. That gesture transforms you, makes you more receptive to their proposals, more inclined to defend their interests. Over time, these small gifts accumulate into a web of invisible chains. What starts as a cup of coffee turns into loyalty programs, preferential treatment, and excuses to overlook faults. You find yourself rooted to the brand, the person, the group that showered you with tiny tokens of gratitude. Those tokens weren't freebies, they were seeds planted in your mind, growing into a forest of obligation. And when you realize how deep the chains run, you see the shock of betrayal. You've defended ideas that never felt like yours, promised support to people you barely trust, and sunk time and energy into projects that leave you empty. All because a sequence of small gifts primed you to say yes, again and again. It feels like magic until you recognize it as a calculated strategy. So next time someone offers you a small gift, pause. Feel the weight of that gesture on your conscience. Notice the stirring in your gut, the tiny voice whispering you owe them something. Ask yourself, does genuine generosity demand a price? Or is this simply another link in the chain of control, designed to bend your will ever so slightly? Real generosity feels different. It leaves you feeling lighter in your chest, not bound by invisible ropes. It creates warmth that doesn't linger with expectation. It sparks joy without a ledger of debts. True kindness encourages open-heartedness, not hesitation. It feels like sunlight on bare skin, clear, honest, and free of strings. And that lightness is a reminder that not every gift carries a hidden cost. It demands nothing in return. Understanding this hidden trigger doesn't rob you of pleasure, it grants you freedom. When you recognize the scaffold of obligation built beneath each generous act, you unlock the power to chart your own path. You can accept gifts gratefully and still pause to ask the hard questions. You can refuse politely, preserving your autonomy and integrity. That is the power of awareness, the true gift beneath every gesture, and the key to unshakable self-mastery in a world designed to bind you. But if a running tab of tiny favors can bind your will, what happens when they start calling you an expert? Imagine stepping into a room and feeling the air shift around you. Every pair of eyes turns toward your voice. Every conversation hushes at your approach. You taste the sweetness of recognition, the gentle warmth that floods your chest when someone whispers, "expert." It feels like sunlight wrapped around you, a glow that promises power and respect. But beneath that golden light lies a hidden burden. The moment you are crowned with authority, invisible chains coil around your mind, tightening with every nod of agreement. You begin to notice the ledger that surfaces in your thoughts. Each question becomes a line item, every expectation a weight to be carried. You replay your words late into the night, worrying that a single misstep might tip the scales against you. Simple conversations twist into tests of your worth, and you find yourself measuring every pause, every inflection, afraid of the unseen balance sheet that tallies your successes and failures. The label that once felt like a crown now presses against your skull. The doubt creeps in like a shadow at dusk. What started as a flicker of uncertainty in your early days has grown into a wildfire of second-guessing. You remember the first time you hesitated before answering, the cold panic in your chest when you feared you would appear less than perfect. Since then, every presentation, every meeting becomes a battleground where you fight to preserve the flawless image others have of you. Sleep abandons you, replaced by looping scenes of past conversations. In the quiet darkness, your mind relentlessly searches for flaws, gnawing away at the promise of infallibility you've so carefully cultivated. Curiosity, Once the flame that guided you through countless discoveries now feels like a dangerous ember. Asking new questions could spark doubt in the minds of those who depend on you. You catch yourself closing notebooks half finished, skipping workshops that lie outside your comfort zone. The thrill of venturing into unknown territory is eclipsed by the terror of exposing gaps in your knowledge. You silence the very impulse that led you here, convinced that exploring too far will shatter the illusion of mastery you have constructed. Your words echo back to you in rooms filled with polite nods and vacant smiles. You mistake agreement for understanding, harmony for truth. The absence of challenge feels like praise, but it is an echo chamber that amplifies your own voice until you can no longer hear the whispers of doubt it once inspired. In that hollow space, genuine dialogue dies, replaced by the hum of self-reinforcement. You grow isolated, trapped in a hall of mirrors where every reflection confirms the authority you must maintain. Pressure becomes your constant companion. The spotlight you once craved now feels like a scorching glare. Before every engagement, your heart thunders in your throat, hands slick with anticipation. You rehearse lines until they lose meaning, pacing hotel corridors at midnight as fear tugs at your mind. Caffeine becomes a ritual, a thin varnish over the anxiety that threatens to consume you. Each step onto the stage is a performance, each question a chance to falter and reveal the human inside the expert mask. In your pursuit of certainty, you thought knowledge would free you from the unknown. Instead, you discover that the expectations of others are the true masters of your fate. You chase ever greater credentials, believing they will shatter your invisible bonds, only to find new bars forming with every accolade. Declining an invitation feels like betrayal, suggesting an alternative like treason. You cling to the safety of the cage you built, mistaking its polished bars for freedom, too afraid to risk everything for the truth. And yet, deep inside, a flicker of rebellion remains. You remember the days when you spoke with reckless wonder, when questions flooded your mind and possibilities stretched into infinity. That spark is buried, but not extinguished. It pulses beneath the surface, aching to break free from the chains of expectation. You feel its gentle tug, a reminder that true expertise is born not from unbroken certainty, but from the courage to admit what you do not know. The title expert feels like a gift, but it is also a contract written in invisible ink. Every endorsement, every accolade binds you to a promise of perfection. Others believe in your answers, and you become the architect of their certainty. Yet the real mastery lies in the questions you dare to ask, the willingness to glimpse the edges of the map you have drawn. When you embrace your own uncertainty, you reclaim the freedom to learn, to grow, to become more than a reflection of expectations. Soon you will discover how unspoken words can drive you to choices you never imagined. You step into an empty room, and the door clicks shut behind you. At first it feels like relief, no chatter, no demands, no expectations. But within seconds, the hush becomes a weight, pressing on your chest, demanding something you can't name. Your pulse quickens, your palms grow slick, and suddenly that silence isn't kindness. It's a demand for action. In the void, you feel adrift, flailing for meaning. Your mind refuses to tolerate the emptiness. It stitches together explanations, guilt trips, excuses, anything to make the silence bearable. You start to fill the space with words you never planned to say, revealing more than you intended. In that moment, you learn how absence speaks louder than any voice. The quiet is a blank sheet of paper handed to you by someone else's unseen hand. You're expected to write its story, to give it purpose, and so you scrawl conclusions across that empty page, convincing yourself each line is your own idea. You justify compromises before they're even offered, nodding to proposals you haven't heard. Silence wires you to obey without questioning the source. Imagine you're in a meeting where no one volunteers an opinion, waiting for someone to break the ice. The clock on the wall ticks louder than any voice. Every passing second amplifies self-doubt until you blurt out a half-formed opinion just to end the torture. You watch as heads turn to you, as though your words were chosen freely. But the truth is that the absence of sound forced your hand. Your heart races before you even speak. You sense every breath you take is under scrutiny, as if the silence is waiting to pounce the instant you hesitate. It toys with your instincts, sharpening your anxiety until control slips through your fingers. By the time you find your voice, you're convinced you had no choice, that the quiet cornered you and you surrendered. Silence plays on your need for closure. It teases you with unanswered questions. What do they think of you? Why is no one speaking? Are you unwelcome? Your imagination fills the gaps like ink spreading on blotting paper. You craft narratives about hidden agendas and secret judgments, all born from empty air. And then you act on those stories, reshaping reality to match the ghost you've created. It's the ultimate misdirection. While you wrestle with what might be, you lose focus on what is. You agree to concessions, you confess doubts, you reveal vulnerabilities that never needed exposing. The person orchestrating the silence remains unnoticed, smiling behind the scenes. They know that in the quiet, the mind becomes a puppet, dancing on strings of uncertainty. Anticipation heightens the effect. Think of waiting for a reply that never comes, your phone in your hand like a lifeline. Each second without notification feels like an accusation. Your muscles tense, your thoughts spin, and you finally send a message you would never have drafted in calm. It's a desperate act to break the freeze, a surrender to the pressure that silence covertly applies. Silence can be weaponized in every relationship, from boardrooms to bedrooms. In arguments, a partner stops speaking, and you soon apologize for crimes you didn't commit. In friendships, a text left unread becomes proof of guilt. In families, the unasked question becomes the unspoken boundary. In each scenario, silence forces your hand, directing your moves without a word being uttered. Once you speak, you feel relief, but it's fragile and fleeting. Soon the hush returns, a predator lying in wait. You taste regret on your tongue and wonder why you revealed so much. You replay every moment of stillness, blaming yourself for falling into the trap. But the trap was never visible. It was built on absence, on the spaces between words. Breaking silence feels like reclaiming power, yet you leave a piece of yourself behind each time. The gap draws blood, and you bleed your will into its emptiness. Every confession, every concession, every hastily offered opinion is a toll paid to the void. And the void grows richer, stronger, more capable of bending you to its will. The next time you face a silence that hums with expectation, pause, notice the tremor in your voice before you speak. Feel the urge to fill the air with judgments or defenses. Recognize that the quiet is not neutrality. It is a catalyst, a force that shapes your choices. Your first act of resistance is simply to breathe, to sit with the silence without flinching. And when you do break that hush, do it on your own terms. Speak when you decide you have something to say, not because the void demands it. Silence may be patient, but your intention can be more powerful. Claim your voice before you lose it, to an empty room that never asked permission. Up next, you'll discover how racing against the clock can leave you powerless and trapped by your own urgency. You're late. Not just by the clock, but in the mind. Your thoughts are racing, breath uneven. shoulders tight. Every second feels stolen, every task rushed. You glance at your phone, flick through notifications, juggle mental checklists. You're moving, yes, but thinking. You tell yourself you're being efficient, productive. But beneath the blur of motion, something darker is happening. Your judgment is being drowned. Hurry doesn't just change your pace, it changes your perception. It shrinks your mental field of view. In a rush, nuance disappears. You start seeing the world in binaries, good or bad, urgent or irrelevant, friend or threat. There's no time for depth, for ambiguity, for careful evaluation. You react instead of reflect. You survive instead of decide. And that's the trap. Because hurry doesn't just steal time, it steals clarity. It turns your mind into a tunnel, your options into instinct. You default to shortcuts, stereotypes, gut reactions, habitual choices. You trust the loudest thought in the moment, not the wisest one. And that makes you easy to control. All someone has to do is create urgency, force a deadline, frame a choice as do or die. And suddenly your decisions are no longer yours. They're engineered. Look at advertising. Why do you think everything is limited time only? Last chance. Act now. It's not about the product. It's about hijacking your judgment. Rush you enough, and you won't ask if you need it. You'll just grab it. The same principle fuels clickbait, outrage cycles, breaking news alerts. Flood your mind with speed, and it loses the luxury of thought. But the consequences go deeper. When you live in a constant state of hurry, your brain starts treating everything as a crisis. Cortisol rises, empathy drops. You snap at strangers, distrust nuance, ignore contradictions. Even your sense of morality compresses. You start asking, what's fastest? Not what's right. You choose the easy apology over the hard truth, the familiar lie over the complicated reality. Not because you're cruel, but because you're rushed. And over time, this becomes your identity. The rushed self, the anxious self. The anxious self. You stop questioning if your priorities are yours, if your pace is sustainable, if your life is even aligned with what you truly value. You become reactive, transactional, robotic. And what's terrifying is you don't notice the shift. Because busy feels important. Hurry feels like progress. But it's an illusion. A treadmill disguised as momentum. You've probably felt it, that shallow breath, when you're multitasking. That sense of never quite arriving. You wake up tired, go to sleep, wired. You're efficient, but empty. You get things done, but none of them feel done. And deep down, a quiet dread grows that your life is slipping by. Not because of chaos, but because of speed. The worst part, the system rewards you for it. Workplaces celebrate the fastest responder, not the most thoughtful one. Social media amplifies instant reactions, not considered insights. Society trains you to value urgency over accuracy, speed over substance. And slowly you stop valuing judgment at all. But here's the secret. Slowness is not laziness. Stillness is not apathy. In fact, reclaiming your time, your pace, your breath is the most radical act of resistance. It's how you regain control of your own mind. Because only in slowness do you see clearly. Only when you pause do the false choices fall apart. Only when you breathe do you realize that urgency was never your enemy, it was your leash. And maybe that's the truth they don't want you to realize, that the more hurried you are, the less human you become. The more rushed your life, the more automatic your decisions. The more predictable, the more pliable. Judgment drowns not in water, but in noise. And hurry is its perfect disguise. But what happens when that noise turns inward? When confusion itself becomes the weapon? What if the next trap doesn't speed you up, but scrambles your sense of what's real. You ever find yourself stuck mid-thought, halfway between two ideas that won't quite click? Like your brain's spinning its wheels, but going nowhere. That isn't just a glitch in your thinking. That's confusion. And confusion isn't passive. It's not just something that happens to you. It's something that can be done to you on purpose. See, confusion locks the mind, not in a metaphorical way, in a biological one. When your brain encounters too many contradictions at once, it can't resolve them cleanly, so it freezes. And while you're frozen, while you're second-guessing, rechecking, mentally flailing, someone else can step in and direct your thoughts for you. It starts with overload. Misinformation, mixed messages, half-truths. You see it in cults, in authoritarian regimes, in gaslighting relationships. They all use confusion like a crowbar to pry open your certainty and replace it with doubt. Say one thing, say the opposite, then blame you for not understanding. And once you're unsure, once you're spiraling, they offer clarity. But it's a clarity they control. Your brain craves coherence. It can't tolerate unresolved tension for long. That's why a confusing message paired with a confident explanation is so effective. You stop trusting yourself. You start trusting the person who seems to make sense. It doesn't matter if they're right. What matters is that they sound sure. Certainty becomes more seductive than truth. This isn't just manipulation. It's cognitive sabotage. Confusion triggers what's called cognitive dissonance. The mental discomfort of holding two conflicting beliefs at once. It's agonizing. So your mind rushes to resolve it, usually by discarding whichever belief causes the most stress. And if that belief is your own intuition, your gut instinct, your past sense of reality, you let it go. You betray yourself just to feel at peace. Now think about how this shows up everywhere. Political narratives that contradict themselves daily. Advertisements that promise freedom while selling dependence. News cycles that bombard you with crisis after crisis until you stop trying to make sense of it all. It's not random. It's strategy, because a confused mind is a vulnerable one, not curious, not skeptical, just tired and ready to be told what to believe. Even education systems do it. One moment, you're taught to think critically. The next, you're punished for stepping outside the accepted answers. You're encouraged to question, just not too much. You're given the illusion of freedom, but handed scripts instead. And the moment you try to break out, you're told you're wrong, irrational, unstable. Confusion becomes the mechanism by which conformity is enforced. In relationships, confusion is control in disguise. Ever been told that something didn't happen the way you remember, that you're too sensitive, that you're reading too much into things? That's not just invalidation, that's precision-engineered confusion, a tactic called gaslighting. The more uncertain you become about what's real, the more dependent you become on the person defining your reality for you. And the scariest part, it works. Even on people who think they're too smart to be manipulated, especially on them, because intelligence doesn't protect you from confusion. In fact, the more you know, the easier it is to get tangled in your own thoughts. To overanalyze, to search for patterns that aren't there, to question your own logic until it fractures. So, how do you fight back? You slow down, you sit in the confusion instead of fleeing it. You resist the urge to find the first answer that makes you feel better. You ask, who benefits from me being confused? Who is offering clarity, and why do they want me to accept it? You learn to live with uncertainty long enough to spot the manipulator behind the curtain. Because clarity that comes too fast is often counterfeit. Real understanding takes time. It's uncomfortable. It's slow. But it's yours. And once you reclaim your mind from confusion, you begin to see what was hidden all along. You see how every dissonant message was a tether, every contradiction a chain. You see the invisible hand guiding your thoughts, not for your benefit, but for theirs. But clarity is dangerous too, because once you see, you can't unsee. And once you break free, you can't go back. So ask yourself now, what belief are you holding just to feel certain? What lie have you accepted because it was easier than sitting in the dark? And what happens when someone offers not clarity, but a promise? A promise so compelling, you'd do anything to keep it alive. You walk around with it every day and never question it. It's the promise, the silent, ever-present voice in your mind that says, one day it will all make sense. Keep going, it will pay off. The suffering has a purpose. That's the promise you were handed long ago, before you knew how to ask for proof. A whispered assurance that life bends toward meaning, that struggle leads to reward, that pain somehow is an investment. But here's the truth, you rarely examine that promise may not be real. It might just be a leash. Hope is powerful. It keeps you upright when everything else collapses. It makes you show up to jobs you hate. Stay in relationships that hollow you out and endure systems that offer crumbs while convincing you a feast is just around the corner. Hope isn't just emotional resilience, it's the most efficient form of control ever invented. You're not pushed forward by threat, by force, or by chains. You're pulled forward by belief, by the story that the payoff is coming, and the brilliance of this system. That payoff never needs to arrive. Just the idea that it might is enough. Think about religion, ideology, careerism, any belief system that demands sacrifice now for reward later. Why are they so effective? Because they hook into your deepest wiring, the need to believe that pain has purpose, that your effort means something, that all this isn't just random suffering with no finish line. But what if the promise is a lie? What if the hope you've been clinging to isn't your strength, but your prison? What if the system isn't broken, but functioning exactly as designed, promising you progress, dangling fulfillment like a carrot just out of reach, while siphoning your energy, your time, your years? The most dangerous promises are the ones you don't remember agreeing to, the ones absorbed through culture, repetition, and unspoken rules. Be patient, be obedient. Keep working, keep believing. Don't question, just wait. You tell yourself it's noble, that enduring, without evidence, is strength, that hope is a virtue. But look closer. Who benefits from your hope? Who profits from your patience? Who gets richer, more powerful, more stable, while you stay exactly where you are, clinging to a maybe? It's a hard truth. Hope can be manufactured, installed, weaponized. Think about the lottery tickets, the motivational speakers, the staged success stories. Every underdog narrative ends the same, with victory. So you wait, you work harder, you tolerate more, because your turn must be next. Right. But hope doesn't guarantee change. It just postpones despair. And here's the scariest part. The promise doesn't need to be real. It just needs to be loud enough to drown out your doubt. And if you ever stop believing, the world rushes in to remind you, don't be so negative. Things will get better. Keep your chin up. Because if too many people stop believing, the whole system begins to crack. The lie must be maintained, not for your sake, but for theirs. So ask yourself this. Who gave you that promise? Who benefits when you obey it? What would your life look like if you stopped chasing a reward that may never arrive? That's not to say hope is worthless, but hope should be yours, not handed to you. It should come from your own values, your own path, not from a world built to extract from you while feeding you stories. Because when hope is yours, it stops being a leash. It becomes a tool. And maybe then, you stop waiting for life to pay off and start building something that doesn't require permission. But before you rebuild that promise from scratch, consider something stranger. Why does a familiar face have such power over you, even when you don't know why? You're walking through a crowd, and suddenly you see someone. You don't know them. You've never met them, but their face feels familiar. Something about their eyes, the curve of their mouth, maybe the way they smile, it makes you feel safe, like you've known them your whole life. You don't question it, you just trust them. But why? Why does a familiar face win you over, even if it's a trick? Your brain is wired for shortcuts. It needs them. It can't afford to calculate every threat, every interaction from scratch. So it uses something called the mere exposure effect. The more you're exposed to something, the more you tend to like it. It doesn't need to be logical. Repetition alone creates comfort. Familiarity becomes safety, and safety becomes trust. This is why advertising works. This is why propaganda works. This is why smiling faces on posters, seen just enough times, start to feel trustworthy, even if you know nothing about the person behind them. It's not their values you're responding to. It's the sensation of recognition. It's a primal echo in your brain whispering, "I've seen this before. It must be okay," but it's not okay. Because this same mechanism that once kept our ancestors safe by recognizing friendly faces in the tribe is now exploited in ways that manipulate us without our awareness. Politicians, influencers, marketers, they all rely on the mere exposure effect. They make sure their faces show up everywhere, not because they're saying anything important, but because your brain is silently building familiarity with them. And familiarity breeds trust, not respect, not admiration, just trust. You might believe you're making rational decisions, but more often than not, your brain is just leaning toward the path it's already walked. Familiarity tricks you into thinking something is right, even when it's wrong. It's why nostalgia feels good, why sequels keep making money, why people stick to routines, even bad ones. The known is safer than the unknown, and that's exactly what manipulation feeds on. Now imagine a con artist. They don't just lie, they use your brain against you. They mirror your expressions. They mimic your speech patterns. They plant their face in your memory with small, repetitive cues. When you see them again, you feel like you know them. You don't. But the illusion is already working. You've let your guard down before a word is even spoken. And what about friendships? Relationships. It's no accident that we often fall for people who remind us of someone else. A parent, a past love, an old friend, familiarity, writes the script before we even realize we're acting. We trust them because they echo someone we already know, someone we've already filed under safe. But echoes can lie, and resemblance is not reliability. This trick runs deeper than faces. It's in voices, scents, gestures. It's in political slogans that sound eerily like something you've heard before. It's in movements that reuse symbols, phrases, rhythms. You don't have to understand them. You just have to recognize them. And that recognition slips past critical thought and straight into belief. Think about that for a second. Belief shaped not by logic or truth, but by repetition. And still, you're convinced you're immune. But no one is. The most dangerous thing about the mere exposure effect is that it feels like instinct. You don't notice it happening. You feel drawn to people, ideas, aesthetics, without realizing it's just your brain chasing the comfortable pattern. The pattern it already knows. The pattern it wants to trust. And the people who understand this, they win your vote. Your money, your time, your loyalty, all by showing up just enough times. So next time you feel strangely drawn to someone you barely know, ask yourself, do you like them? Or do you just recognize them? Is this trust or just a trick? Is this comfort or conditioning? Familiarity is not truth. Recognition is not virtue. But in a world moving too fast to question every instinct, they are often treated as if they are. And that's the real danger. Because the face that feels familiar might not be safe. It might be the one that's already figured out how to change your mind without saying a word. So if you think you're immune to this, wait until the next segment shows you how simply hearing something again can rewire your beliefs without your permission. It's strange, isn't it? How something can sound absurd the first time you hear it, but by the 10th, it almost feels like common sense. At first, your brain fights back. It dismisses, it ridicules. That can't be true, you tell yourself. But then you hear it again. Maybe not word for word, but in spirit. The same idea, reframed, the same message, repeated. And something subtle begins to shift. This isn't an accident. It's one of the oldest psychological tricks in the book. Repetition reshapes reality. It's called the illusory truth effect, and it's terrifying in its simplicity. The more often you hear something, the more likely you are to believe it's true, regardless of its actual truth. Your mind is built to conserve energy. When a piece of information feels familiar, your brain spends less time scrutinizing it. Familiarity is mistaken for credibility. Your mental defenses lower, not because you're weak, but because you're efficient. Efficient to a fault. Think about advertising. You might think you're immune to a catchy jingle or a slogan, but months later, it's the one brand you instinctively reach for. Why? Not because it's better. Not because it's proven, but because it feels safe, familiar, repetition disguised as trust. This doesn't just apply to products, it applies to beliefs, social norms, even your own identity. You've been told who you are by parents, by teachers, by media, by yourself, so many times that you've stopped questioning it. You've memorized the script, rehearsed the lines, forgotten they were ever written by someone else. Now ask yourself, what ideas do you believe, not because they made sense, but because you've heard them so many times they became internal law? You may not even notice it. That's the scariest part. You hear something, scoff, move on, but the idea doesn't leave. It lingers in the background, whispering, resurfacing. Each time it reappears, it feels a little less alien, a little more plausible. Until one day, it doesn't feel like something you heard. It feels like something you believe. This is how propaganda works. Not with force, but with frictionless repetition. A lie doesn't need to be convincing. It just needs to be familiar. Say it enough, and it starts to stick. Deny it, mock it, debunk it, but hear it often enough, and it begins to sound reasonable. Even your memories aren't immune. Recall a moment enough times, and your brain starts editing it, smoothing over gaps, reinforcing certain details while forgetting others. Over time, the edited version feels more real than the original. Repetition doesn't just rewrite facts, it rewires perception. And this can be used against you. News cycles, political rhetoric, social narratives all exploit this phenomenon. Repeat a fear often enough, and it becomes truth. Repeat a label, criminal, hero, traitor, patriot, and eventually it becomes identity. It just has to echo. But repetition isn't only a weapon used on you. You use it against yourself too. Every time you say, "I'm not good enough, I always screw things up," or "I'll never be happy," your brain takes notes. It doesn't argue. It doesn't protest. It simply begins to believe. So the next time you hear something for the second, third, or 10th time, pause. Ask yourself, is this true or just familiar? Have I actually thought about this, or has it been pre-chewed and force-fed to me? Your mind might be a sponge, but you get to choose the water, because repetition is powerful, but awareness is stronger. And sometimes the most dangerous trap isn't believing a lie. It's hearing it so many times you forget to ask if it ever was one. But what if even the simplest question can be a weapon? What's the most dangerous weapon in manipulation? Not fear, not even pain. It's a question. A single, carefully constructed question that slips past your defenses, not because it's subtle, but because it feels harmless, logical, even innocent. But simplicity is deceptive. Think of the classic. If you could save 5 people by sacrificing one, would you do it? That sounds like a moral test. It isn't. It's a trapdoor, disguised as a thought experiment. Because the moment you answer yes or no, you've already accepted the premise. You've already stepped into their frame, surrendered the terms of the debate, and let someone else define your moral boundaries. This is how control works, not by forcing answers on you, but by narrowing the questions you're allowed to ask. A simple question is like a hallway. You don't notice the walls until you try to turn around. By then, it's too late. Let's go deeper. When someone asks you, don't you care about other people? What choice do you have? If you say no, you're heartless. If you say yes, you've agreed to let them define what caring looks like. You've just opened the door to guilt, obligation, and manipulation. Or consider this. Why are you being so defensive? That question doesn't invite reflection. It's an accusation wearing the mask of curiosity. If you defend yourself, you validate it. If you don't, your silence becomes the evidence. Either way, they've won. The question was never about truth, it was about control. This isn't just psychological sleight of hand. It's a systematic tactic. Cult leaders use it. Abusive partners use it. Politicians and marketers thrive on it. And the reason it works is because your brain loves simple questions. They bypass your skepticism and appeal straight to your desire for clarity, for resolution, for answers. Simplicity feels safe. But it's a false safety, because real questions, dangerous, liberating questions, are messy. They don't lead to quick answers. They lead to doubt. The danger lies in this: every question plants a seed. Not just in your mind, but in your identity. The moment you accept the frame, you begin rearranging your beliefs to make the answer make sense. You don't just answer the question, you become the person who would answer that way. It's why interrogation rooms don't start with threats. They start with soft questions. Help us understand what happened. Would you like some water? Because once you agree to speak, you've already agreed to play. Think about how advertising works. You're not asked, do you want to spend money on something you don't need? You're asked, which of these makes you feel more confident? The question hijacks your judgment. It reframes consumption as self-worth. Now it's not about wasting money. It's about choosing who you are, even in conversations with yourself. This happens. You wake up exhausted and ask, why am I so lazy? That question assumes the problem is you. It buries every external factor, stress, burnout, systemic pressure, beneath a single self-blaming frame. The question becomes a cage. You don't need to be lied to. You just need to be asked the wrong question. Because the wrong question makes the lie feel like your own idea. So how do you protect yourself? You don't start by rejecting answers. You start by rejecting questions. Every time someone asks you something, pause. Ask yourself, what is this question assuming? What path is it leading me down? Who benefits if I accept this premise? And most importantly, Who gave them the right to ask it in the first place? A dangerous question isn't dangerous because of what it asks, but because of what it makes you stop asking. And once you've surrendered the power to ask your own questions, you've already lost control. So be careful, not of answers, but of the frame that shapes them. Because the next time someone asks you something simple, something easy, obvious, almost too clean, you might not notice what you've traded until it's too late. And speaking of things that seem harmless at first, have you ever wondered why you're more likely to chase something just because someone else says it's rare? You see a sign, just one. It says, "Last one left." And before you can even think, you want it. Not because you need it. Not because it's the best, but because it's rare. Or at least, it feels rare. And that's enough to trigger something ancient in your brain, something wired into your survival instincts. When something is scarce, your mind doesn't just want it. It panics. It believes you'll suffer without it, that someone else will get it first, that if you don't act now, you'll lose something, even if that something doesn't matter. This is scarcity bias. And it's been running your decisions in the background for your entire life. Scarcity changes everything. It alters perception, warps judgment, and hijacks rationality. That's why marketers love it. That's why cults use it. That's why dangerous ideologies spread faster when they're threatened with extinction. Because when people believe something is limited, they don't pause to think, they leap. You're not immune. No one is. Just look at your behavior during a sale, when there's a red countdown timer, when the product says only 2 left, when you're told it's exclusive or limited edition. Logic shuts off. It's not about value anymore. It's about immediacy. It's about impulse. It's about fear. Scarcity doesn't just make things seem more valuable, it makes them seem essential. And the more emotional the decision, the less conscious you are of what's really driving you. Relationships, careers, beliefs. Think about how often you've stayed in something toxic, not because it was good, but because you were convinced it was the only chance you had, that you'd never find better, that you had to take it, hold it, fight for it, because what if you lost it, and there was nothing else? This is the most dangerous part of scarcity. It makes you settle. It convinces you that anything rare must be worth keeping. It tells you that discomfort is the price of access, that suffering is just the tax you pay to have what no one else can, that because something is hard to get, it must be worth having, even when it's not. And the systems around you, they know this. They weaponize it. Luxury brands manufacture scarcity by releasing products in tiny batches. They create wait lists. They use language like invite only, by referral, while supplies last. You think you're chasing status, but really you're being manipulated by fear. Fear of exclusion, fear of missing out, fear of not being special. But it goes deeper, even beyond possessions. Think about ideologies, political movements, social narratives. They become more aggressive, more appealing when they claim to be under attack. People rally not just around beliefs, but around the fear that those beliefs are endangered. And so scarcity becomes a shield for dangerous ideas. It makes them feel precious, sacred, worth defending at all costs. Even lies become more believable when they feel rare, the forbidden, the censored, the thing they don't want you to know. That's how conspiracy theories gain traction, not through logic, but through scarcity. If information is hidden, the mind believes it must be true. If everyone says it's wrong, it must be dangerous. And if it's dangerous, it must be powerful. Scarcity doesn't make you curious. It makes you obedient. And maybe the most brutal example of all, love. Ever notice how you romanticize the one who pulled away? the one who stopped texting, the one who became cold. You didn't love them more because they were better. You loved them more because they disappeared. Because your brain confused their absence with value. You chased them not because they gave you joy, but because they gave you withdrawal. Scarcity triggers survival. And when you're in survival mode, you don't think clearly. You can't. Your brain is wired to act fast, not right. This is how you get trapped in patterns, in systems, in relationships, in beliefs. You start reacting to the threat of loss instead of the truth of worth. You stop asking, "Is this good?" and start asking, "What if I can't get another?" And that's how they control you. Because when things feel rare, you jump, even when you should be walking away. But what happens when that rare thing isn't even real? What happens when the scarcity is manufactured? When the urgency is artificial? When you've shaped your life around chasing something you never needed in the first place? That's when it gets hard to tell the difference between what you want and what you were conditioned to crave. And that's where stories come in, because more often than not, it's a story, just one, that makes all of it feel real. So ask yourself this: what's the one story you've believed your whole life without ever questioning it? Because next, we're going to find out just how much that story controls you. What if your entire worldview, your beliefs, your values, even your sense of right and wrong, wasn't the result of thousands of independent experiences, but the product of one story, just one? One narrative you heard as a child or in a moment of vulnerability. A story so deeply woven into your identity that you stopped seeing it as a story at all. It became the lens, the default, the invisible filter through which everything else was judged. Not all stories begin with once upon a time. Some begin with something more subtle. People like you aren't meant to succeed. Or if you're kind, others will be kind to you. Or life is fair if you work hard enough. These aren't fairy tales, they're programming. And once accepted, they become invisible rules, unquestioned assumptions that guide your every decision. Stories like these don't just shape how you see the world, they shape what you think is even possible in it. Take the story of self-worth. Maybe someone told you early on that your value came from how useful you are, how much you achieve, how much you give. That story teaches you to exhaust yourself, to measure your existence by output, to feel guilty when you rest, ashamed when you say no, and terrified of becoming irrelevant. It's not just a belief, it's a compass, spinning you in circles, always chasing, never arriving. Or the story of trust. Perhaps you learned young that people can't be trusted, that love is earned through perfection, and vulnerability is a liability. So now you overthink every text, analyze every silence, and expect betrayal like it's a law of nature. That story keeps you safe, but alone, suspicious, trapped behind emotional armor that was never meant to be permanent. These stories aren't just internal, they're cultural. They're passed down like heirlooms, encoded in religion, media, even education. Think about how many people believe the world rewards good behavior, that bad people always get what they deserve, that justice is real and consistent, that merit wins. These beliefs feel moral, even comforting. But what if they're just stories told to keep people obedient? What if believing in fairness is less about truth and more about control? The mind craves order. Chaos is unbearable. So we cling to narratives that make suffering make sense. If I'm suffering, it must be my fault. If I do everything right, I'll be safe. These stories are defense mechanisms. They give pain a purpose, but they also blind you. They make you blame yourself for systems you didn't build. They make you swallow guilt that isn't yours. Worse, these stories are sticky. They survive scrutiny because they hide inside emotions. You can intellectually reject them, say out loud, "I know that's not true," but still feel bound by them because stories don't live in logic. They live in fear, in shame, in memory. And here's where it gets dangerous. Once you identify with a story, challenging, it feels like violence against yourself. If you believe you're the fixer, the helper, the strong one, what happens when you need help? What happens when you break? Admitting the story was wrong doesn't feel like growth. It feels like identity death, like becoming a stranger to yourself. So you keep playing the role, you act out the script. You sacrifice your needs to protect a version of yourself that maybe never really existed. But stories can be rewritten. They have to be. Because if you don't consciously edit the story that shaped your beliefs, it will keep shaping them forever. You'll keep reacting instead of choosing. You'll keep living someone else's narrative and calling it fate. Rewriting the story doesn't mean erasing the past. It means questioning the conclusion. Asking yourself, is this belief serving me now? Or is it just something I've carried for too long? Sometimes the most radical act is not learning something new. It's unlearning the story you didn't choose, but still obey. Because beliefs aren't facts. They're habits of thought. And all it takes is one honest look, one moment of clarity to realize the story you've been living isn't the only one available. But most people never take that moment because they're too busy following rules they can't even see. You follow rules you can't see, not because you're weak, but because you've been trained not to notice them. Like a fish unaware of water, you move through invisible boundaries every day, never questioning, never resisting, because they don't look like rules at all. They look like habits, like tradition, like just the way things are. But the rules are there, quietly baked into language, etched into architecture, buried inside your instincts. You feel them in the way people stare when you speak too loudly, in the silence that follows a question no one wants to answer, in the anxiety that creeps in when you stand out just a little too much. That's not paranoia, it's social conditioning. You've learned over time what not to say, what not to ask, where not to go. The boundaries are unwritten, but they are enforced just the same. Think of a child in school. No one ever sits them down and says, "You must raise your hand to speak." But they watch, they absorb, and eventually they conform. Not through punishment, but through subtle feedback, praise for obedience, silence for dissent. That pattern never goes away. It just gets more complex, more sophisticated. The adult version is more sinister. It doesn't use rulers or detention. It uses shame, disapproval, the quiet, suffocating pressure of conformity. You learn to self-regulate, to edit yourself before you even speak, to stay within lines no one ever drew but everyone sees. That's how invisible rules work. They don't need to be enforced, they just need to be believed. And you believe them, because you think you're acting freely. That's the brilliance of the trap. When the rules are invisible, your obedience looks like choice. You tell yourself you want this job, this routine, this life, when in fact you were only ever shown a narrow path and told it was a highway. But who draws the path? Who writes the rules you're too blind to see? It's not some grand conspiracy. It's culture. It's history. It's the quiet aggregation of 1,000 tiny nudges, rewards, and punishments. These rules aren't in a book. They're in your body, in your breath, in the way your pulse quickens when you think about breaking them. Consider how you dress, how you speak, how you walk into a room. All of it shaped by invisible expectations. Not laws, not orders, just norms. Powerful, invisible norms that tell you how to be. Step outside them, and you'll feel it instantly. The discomfort, the eyes, the cold. You'll feel the rule you just broke, even if you can't name it. And that's the terrifying part. You obey not because you fear punishment, but because you don't want to be seen as wrong. You've internalized the consequences. The prison is inside you now, but not all invisible rules are social. Some are psychological, deep, inherited assumptions about what's possible, what's allowed, what you deserve. You learned them from parents, from teachers, from every disappointed look that told you not to reach too far. These rules whisper, don't stand out, don't be too ambitious, don't want too much. And without even realizing it, you comply. These rules shape your relationships. They tell you who you're allowed to love, how you're allowed to grieve, how much vulnerability is acceptable before it becomes weakness. They dictate how long you can cry, how loudly you can scream, how much of yourself you're allowed to reveal before people turn away. And because they're invisible, they are unchallenged. They become sacred. We call them normal and never question who benefits from that normality. The worst part? The rules adapt. They're fluid. What was taboo yesterday becomes expected today. But the mechanism stays the same. Silent pressure, invisible consequences, internalized obedience. The content changes, but the control remains. So how do you break rules you can't see? First, you have to learn to feel them. Every time you hesitate before speaking, ask yourself, who's holding you back? Every time you dress down a dream, before you say it out loud, ask who told you it was too much. Every time you shrink, apologize, deflect, recognize the rule you're obeying. Awareness is the first rebellion, and awareness hurts. It reveals how much of your life has been shaped, not by freedom, but by invisible hands you never questioned. But it's only in that pain that the spell starts to break. You begin to test the edges. Say the thing you weren't supposed to say, do the thing you were told not to do. And at first, it feels like danger. But eventually, it starts to feel like something else, freedom. You'll find others too. People who've started to see through the veil. People who've stopped obeying out of habit. And together, you start to build something new. Not just a rejection of invisible rules, but the creation of visible, intentional ones. Rules based on truth, on clarity, on choice. And now that you've seen the hidden strings pulling your life into shape, you'll never unsee them. You'll never move through the world the same way again. Because once you've touched freedom, even for a moment, compliance feels like death. But what happens when the people closest to you, your friends, become part of the trap? You thought they were your safety net, your home, your refuge, but sometimes the people closest to you aren't your protectors, they're your prison. Not because they mean to hurt you, but because they're invested in who you were, not who you could become. Friends are supposed to celebrate your growth, but growth means change, and change threatens the unspoken agreements your friendships are built on. You play a role in their story. You're the funny one, the loyal one, the broken one they help fix. The version of you they're used to, safe, predictable, unthreatening, is the version they want to keep. So what happens when you outgrow it? When you start healing, evolving, taking risks they never dared to? That's when the subtle sabotage begins. They don't yell, they don't confront, they just withdraw support. They laugh at your new habits. They call your goals unrealistic. They remind you of your failures, not to be cruel, but to keep you grounded. They say things like, don't forget where you came from, which really means, don't stop being who I need you to be. This is how friends trap you. Not always out of malice. Sometimes it's fear. Your growth makes them look at their stagnation, Your courage exposes their complacency. So instead of rising with you, they pull you back down. Not because they hate you, because they need you to stay small enough to keep the friendship balanced. It's not just about who they want you to be, it's about who you feel safe being around them. Maybe you shrink yourself to avoid envy, or hide your ambition to protect their ego. You lower your voice, your standards, your dreams, so the friendship doesn't feel like a competition. But in doing that, you lose yourself. There's a terrifying paradox here. Your fear of losing your friends can cost you your identity. You stay in a dynamic that celebrates your brokenness, but punishes your strength. You let their comfort define your limitations. You choose belonging over becoming, and slowly, that belonging becomes a cage. Some friends are like mirrors. They reflect back who you are. Others are more like anchors. They keep you grounded, but only in the place they need you to stay. Anchors don't always look heavy. They look like inside jokes, shared memories, the comfort of knowing someone's known you for years. But nostalgia is not the same as love. Familiarity is not the same as growth. Ask yourself, are these friendships nurturing your future or preserving your past? Do you feel more alive when you're with them, or just more accepted? It gets harder when the trap isn't made of cruelty, but of kindness. When your friend does love you, when they have been there for you. That history makes it feel disloyal to change. You confuse loyalty with sacrifice. You believe that to grow is to betray. But what if staying the same is the real betrayal? The betrayal of your potential, of your peace, of the life you could have if you weren't living in the echo of who they think you are. The most dangerous traps are the ones that feel like love. Because when a stranger doubts you, it's easy to ignore. But when a friend hesitates, when a friend raises an eyebrow or offers a half-hearted good luck, it cuts deeper. You start to doubt yourself. Maybe they're right. Maybe you're not ready. Maybe you're being selfish. So you stop. You stall. You sabotage yourself before the world gets the chance to. And the trap works. But here's the truth. They won't tell you. Real friendship evolves. It stretches. It adapts. It grows with you. It doesn't guilt you into staying the same. It challenges you to become more. A true friend isn't threatened by your growth. They're inspired by it. The ones who trap you may not mean to, but that doesn't make the trap less real. It just makes it harder to see, because it's woven from love, familiarity, and the shared fear of outgrowing each other. You don't have to burn bridges, but you do have to walk across them. Leave the version of you that needed their approval. Step into the version that only needs your permission. Because if your friends only love the parts of you that are easy, broken, or small, then they're not loving you. They're loving their comfort. And you weren't born to make other people comfortable. You were born to become. But what if the comfort you protect is actually shame, disguised as connection? What if the trap isn't made by them, but built inside you, brick by the secrets you keep? You don't talk about it. You carry it like a phantom weight, dragging behind you in silence. In the daylight, you smile, you function, you perform. But when the sun goes down, when the distractions vanish, and you're left alone with your own mind, it comes back. That old shame. The one you've buried under routines, responsibilities, and forced optimism. Because shame doesn't scream, it whispers. It seeps in slowly, patiently, like smoke through a keyhole, and it knows exactly where to go. It waits until your defenses are down, until the house is quiet, until your head hits the pillow, and the noise of the world fades just enough for you to hear yourself. That's when it strikes. That's when it reminds you of the lie you told, of the person you hurt, of the opportunity you wasted, the moment you failed, the time you were too scared to be who you really are. And maybe it wasn't even something massive. Maybe no one else would even call it shameful. But you do, because you know the full story. You know what you were thinking. You know what you were avoiding. You know how deeply you betrayed the version of yourself you're still trying to become. Shame is strange like that. It doesn't need a courtroom. It doesn't care about the verdict of others. It only cares about your reflection, the one you can't escape. And here's the disturbing part. Sometimes you don't even realize you're ashamed. Not at first. You just feel exhausted. You just feel restless. You just feel this quiet, aching discomfort that follows you into every conversation, every silence, every lonely night. So you distract yourself. You keep busy. You chase goals. You tell yourself you're growing, improving, evolving. But some part of you knows deep down, none of it is healing anything. It's camouflage. You're not fixing the wound. You're just covering it in productivity. Because healing would mean admitting it. An admission feels like surrender, like failure, like confirming the thing you're trying so hard to deny. And yet, denial costs more than truth ever could. It chips away at your self-worth, fragments your confidence, and turns your life into a performance. Each day a new scene, each interaction a tightly rehearsed monologue meant to prove you're okay. But you're not okay. Because the shame you hide at night doesn't go away with morning light. It just retreats, waits. It will wait for years if it has to. And when it returns, it won't need to knock. It will let itself in. You think you can outrun it. You think more success, more love, more validation will drown it. But shame isn't water-soluble. It clings. It festers. It grows stronger in silence. So what do? You face it. Not all at once, not dramatically, but slowly. You acknowledge its presence. You stop pretending it's not there. And then, this is the hardest part, you try to understand it, where it came from, why it lingers, what it's trying to teach you about the parts of yourself you've exiled. Because shame isn't just pain, it's a signal. A map pointing to your buried values, to the version of yourself you abandoned when things got hard. It's not there to punish you. It's there to remind you of who you once wanted to be, then maybe still could be. But that journey begins not in daylight, not in public, but in the darkness you dread the most, those late, quiet hours when it's just you and your thoughts. That's where the work begins. That's where the truth lives. That's where shame finally loses its grip. Because the only thing more exhausting than carrying your shame is pretending you aren't. But what if that's not the end of it? What if that nightly shame, quiet, constant, corrosive, was just the symptom? What if the real issue is something deeper, something worse? What if everything feels like a crisis now because it actually is? It starts small, not with a fire or a scream, but with something subtle. Your heart racing after a notification, your stomach tightening when a text goes unanswered, your mind spiraling because someone's late by 5 minutes. No explosion, just tension. A growing sense that something, anything, could go wrong at any moment. And that feeling doesn't go away. Every email feels urgent. Every conversation feels loaded. Every glance from a stranger feels like judgment. You can't relax because somewhere deep inside you, the alarm bells are always ringing. You're not in danger, not really, but your body doesn't know that. To it, everything is a crisis. This isn't a personal flaw, it's a design, a feature of the world we've built, or more accurately, the world that's been built around us. Because when everything feels like a crisis, you're easier to control. You don't think as clearly, you don't make bold decisions. You don't ask uncomfortable questions or take meaningful risks. You retreat. You cope. You submit. Fear overrides logic, and stress becomes your operating system. Ask yourself, when was the last time you truly felt calm, not distracted, not numbed out, but truly, deeply calm? Odds are, it's been a while. That's not because you're weak, it's because you're being conditioned to stay on edge by systems that benefit when you're too panicked to push back. The media floods you with dread, disease, disaster, division. Everything is urgent, nothing is resolvable. The goal isn't just to inform, it's to exhaust you. Outrage becomes currency. Panic becomes engagement. You stay locked in because stepping away feels dangerous, irresponsible, like missing a crucial warning. Work is no different. Urgent deadlines, arbitrary crises, impossible expectations. You're praised for putting out fires you had no role in starting. Stress becomes proof of your value. Burnout becomes a badge of honor. There is always more to do, more to fear, more to fix. And in your personal life, crisis follows you home. You're bombarded with curated perfection. People who seem more successful, more attractive, more fulfilled. Every scroll reminds you of what you lack, and that gap between who you are and who you think you should be, that becomes its own crisis. A quiet, relentless emergency gnawing at your identity. Even rest becomes stressful. You think about how you should be meditating, exercising, optimizing. Relaxation becomes another task you're failing. There's no peace, just performance. This constant state of urgency creates a profound illusion that if you can just handle the next crisis, if you can just survive one more week, one more quarter, one more challenge, then maybe, finally, you'll feel okay. But you don't. Because crisis isn't the interruption of your life. It has become your life. And here's the brutal truth. A person in crisis doesn't rebel, they endure. They don't resist systems, they adapt to them. Crisis makes you compliant, not because you agree, but because you're too drained to disagree, too overwhelmed to even imagine an alternative. That's the trap. Because when your nervous system is always in survival mode, you stop dreaming, you stop reaching, you stop asking, why does it have to be this way? And the people in power, they love that. A society where everyone's barely keeping it together is a society that won't fight back, won't organize, won't demand better. It's not fear they need to install in you, it's fatigue, just enough panic to keep you alert. Just enough dread to keep you distracted. So what do? You start by noticing. Notice how often your anxiety isn't about the present moment, but about imagined futures you can't control. Notice how your body reacts to a headline, a tone of voice, a glance. Notice how much of your day is spent in silent emergencies no one else can see. And then you do something radical. You slow down, you breathe, deeply, defiantly. You ask questions before you react. You let some fires burn out on their own. You reclaim your calm, not as a luxury, but as resistance, because when everything feels like a crisis, calm becomes a weapon. Stillness becomes subversive. Presence becomes power. And once you stop reacting to every manufactured emergency, something changes. The world gets quieter. Your thoughts get clearer. And you realize most of the panic wasn't yours to carry. You were taught to live in crisis because it kept you compliant. But now you see through it. You see who profits from your panic. You see how urgency has been used to rob you of peace, clarity, and choice. And you begin to unlearn it. One deep breath at a time. But of course, what happens when someone knows how to make you feel good, too good to ever say no? Have you ever felt yourself warm to someone the moment they said something flattering, a compliment that caught you off guard. It seemed genuine, unexpected, even, but it left you just a little more open, a little more trusting, and maybe, just maybe, a little more willing to reach for your wallet. That's not an accident. That's by design. Flattery isn't just sweet talk, it's psychological leverage, a form of social engineering, so subtle that we rarely notice it working. Not because it appeals to our reason, but because it bypasses it completely. Flattery slips past the guard dogs of skepticism and pride, straight into the softest parts of the ego. Your brain is wired to respond to positive reinforcement. When someone flatters you, they're activating a reward loop, triggering dopamine and making you associate them with pleasure. The moment they compliment your taste, your intelligence, your appearance, your values, you feel seen, appreciated. And in that fleeting moment of emotional elevation, your defenses lower. You're no longer a potential mark. You're a friend, a confidant, a valued individual who deserves the best. But here's the trick. Flattery works best when it feels personalized. Generic praise falls flat. But a comment that seems to recognize something unique about you, that's disarming, that's sticky, that's dangerous. Imagine walking into a high-end clothing store. The salesperson approaches you, not pushy, not aggressive, just warm, attentive. They glance at your outfit and say, "You have an amazing sense of style. That jacket is working hard, but it's you that makes it look expensive." You smile. You didn't even like your jacket that much, but now you're reconsidering. You feel good, better than before. And that emotional boost, it becomes the backdrop for the next part. The pitch. Suddenly, you're trying on clothes you can't afford, just to keep feeling that way. This isn't flattery for friendship's sake. It's a strategic investment. Every compliment is a down payment on your trust, your openness, and eventually your money. The most sophisticated manipulators don't lie with facts. They lie with emotion. They use flattery as a soft entry point, creating a sense of rapport that makes every suggestion they offer feel like advice from a friend, not a seller. This technique is deeply embedded in marketing, sales, even politics. Every carefully chosen word of praise is calibrated to shift your emotional landscape, just enough to influence your behavior without triggering your suspicion. And here's the most chilling part. Even when you know it's flattery, even when you suspect the motive behind it, it still works. Studies show that people respond positively to flattery even when they know it's insincere. Because logic doesn't neutralize the emotional hit. Your mind can resist, but your body already bought in. Flattery doesn't just open your wallet, it makes you loyal. It makes you defend the person flattering you. It creates a psychological debt. After all, they noticed something good about you. They saw something others didn't. How could you not reward that? How could you not trust them? And once that trust is there, the manipulation gets deeper. You're more likely to say yes, to take risks, to invest, to comply. All because someone made you feel good about yourself. That's the invisible transaction. You think you're buying a product, a service, a promise. But really, you're paying for the feeling they gave you, the momentary high of being admired, validated, approved. It's a currency far more powerful than dollars, attention for affection, money for praise, and we're not immune to it. No one is. We crave validation so deeply that we'll trade security, reason, even self-respect to get it. We'll overtip a charming waiter. We'll overspend on a complimented outfit. We'll overtrust a flattering stranger. Because deep down, we're all starving for affirmation. This is what makes flattery so potent. It doesn't just appeal to who we are, it appeals to who we wish we were. It reflects an idealized version of ourselves, then subtly suggests that buying in, literally, is how we become that person. Flattery weaponized becomes persuasion, and persuasion, when wrapped in charm and tailored praise, becomes control. So the next time someone compliments you, pause. Ask yourself, is this admiration or is it a transaction? Are they praising you or are they priming you? Because in a world where attention is currency, your ego is a price tag. And sometimes the most expensive thing you'll ever buy is the illusion that someone really sees you. And speaking of illusions, what if a single word could shift your entire sense of reality? There's a word that can paralyze an entire conversation, a word that can shift a person's belief system, a word that makes you stop mid-thought and reevaluate everything you were sure about just seconds ago. It might be but, or because, or why. It changes depending on the context. But what stays the same is the effect, disruption. Single words don't just fill space, they direct attention. They shape emotion. They act like microscopic switches, flipping something in your brain before you've even realized what happened. Think about the word imagine. The moment you hear it, your mind starts painting a picture. It bypasses logic and slips into visual, emotional mode. Suddenly, you're no longer analyzing, you're experiencing. That one word doesn't just start a sentence, it alters your state of consciousness. And you didn't consent to it, it just happened. Now think about now. But suddenly, they don't describe reality, they hijack it. Now tells your brain to focus. Suddenly injects suspense. Neither word adds detail, but both command attention. The way a whisper commands a silent room. And then there's you. A word so small it disappears in text, yet so powerful it rewires the emotional tone of any statement. Compare people are afraid of failure with you are afraid of failure. One is a thought, the other is a confrontation. You makes it personal, it makes it stick. We like to think that thoughts are ours, that we choose them. But much of the time, we're responding to invisible cues we don't notice. Words that act as mental levers, quietly shifting our perceptions behind the curtain. Take advertising. They've known the power of single words for decades. New, free, guaranteed. These aren't just clickbait, they're triggers. Each one pulls a different psychological lever. New activates curiosity. Free ignites desire. Guaranteed soothes doubt. They're not informative, they're manipulative. By design. Politicians do it too, masterfully. They know which words create fear and which words inspire loyalty. Terrorist, patriot, freedom. These aren't neutral terms, they're emotionally loaded grenades. Throw one into a debate, and suddenly the terms of the argument change, without ever discussing the actual issue. Even in personal relationships, single words hold power. Always. Never. These words collapse nuance. They trap people inside absolutes, locking them into emotional cages. Say, you never listen to me, and you've just turned a moment of frustration into a sweeping indictment. Whether it's true doesn't matter. The word planted the seed. What's eerie is how effortlessly these words pass through our defenses. We don't question them because they feel natural, familiar. But that's the trap. The most powerful tools are the ones we stop noticing. And it's not just manipulation. Some words build as much as they break. Hope. Enough. Sorry. Words that release pressure, soften fear, allow for healing. But even then, they're steering your emotions, just in a different direction. The brain is a pattern-matching machine. When it hears a trigger word, it doesn't ask for context. It leaps forward, fills in the gaps, and decides how to feel before your conscious mind even arrives. You're not thinking your way through it. You're reacting to a sound, a symbol that's carrying decades of emotional weight behind it. And in moments of vulnerability, that matters more than anything. The right word can calm a panic attack, or start one. It can make you open up, or shut down. It can build trust, or destroy it in one breath. That's not just communication, that's power. So when someone says it's just a word, they're lying, or they don't understand. There's no such thing as just a word. Every syllable is a tool, or a weapon, or both. And the scariest part, most of this happens without your awareness. You don't choose to be affected. The word chooses you. Which brings us to a bigger, more unsettling question. How many of your beliefs, your emotions, your actions are the result of a single word someone used at just the right moment? And how many of them still live inside you, silently shaping who you are? Now, here's where it gets even stranger. What if you don't just respond to these words? What if you mimic them too? Because next, you'll see exactly why you copy every move. You've probably noticed it in subtle ways, how people start talking like their friends, mirroring body language, laughing the same way, even adopting the same opinions without realizing it. But have you ever stopped to ask why? Why do you copy every move? It starts early. As children, we mimic our parents, not just their words, but their emotions, gestures, values. It's how we learn. Imitation is the original education system. But here's the twist. It doesn't stop in childhood. You never actually grow out of it. You just become better at hiding the fact that most of what you think, feel, and do is borrowed. This isn't laziness. It's survival. Your brain is constantly scanning your environment for cues on how to behave. It's called social mirroring, and it's hardwired into your neurology. Mirror neurons fire when you watch someone else do something, almost as if you're doing it yourself. You see someone wince in pain, and your body echoes it. You see someone laugh genuinely, and your face begins to smile before you even realize why. It's not conscious, it's automatic. But why does the brain do this? Because mimicry builds connection. Imitating someone signals trust, reduces friction, and increases social cohesion. It's your mind's way of saying, I'm safe, I belong, you can accept me. In evolutionary terms, it made sense. Being cast out of a tribe meant death. So you learn to copy, conform, and assimilate perfectly, invisibly. Even now, your behavior bends toward your social environment, like a tree leaning toward light. This isn't just about body language or accents. It goes deeper. You absorb belief systems, political ideologies, even moral frameworks based on the people around you. It feels like your opinion, but it's really just the loudest or most repeated voice in the room. You believe what they believe, not because it's right, but because it's safe. Agreement feels like truth. And here's where it turns darker. This instinct to copy becomes a tool for control. Advertisers know it. Politicians know it. Influencers know it. They don't need to convince you with logic. They just need enough people to mimic. Once the crowd adopts a behavior, you'll follow without needing to understand why. You'll imitate laughter tracks on a sitcom. You'll crave the latest product because enough people posted it. You'll vote a certain way because it feels like everyone else is doing it. That's the power of conformity disguised as choice. Your identity isn't as fixed as you think. It's porous. You soak in mannerisms, preferences, even emotions, depending on who you're around. Spend time with anxious people and your cortisol levels rise. Surround yourself with ambitious people and you start setting bigger goals, whether you care about them or not. Your sense of self is shaped by proximity. You copy to survive, but then you copy so well, you forget it's a performance. So who are you when no one's watching? That's the unsettling part. Without others to reflect, most people don't know. Solitude becomes frightening because your behavior has always been a reaction to someone else. You laugh because they laugh. You dress because they dress. You speak because they spoke. Strip all that away and you're left with a blank slate that most never learn how to fill. But here's the paradox. You are most influenced when you think you're making independent choices. The more convinced you are that you're unique, the more vulnerable you become to imitation. It's the illusion of autonomy that makes manipulation seamless. You copy without noticing, and you defend your copied identity as if it were your own. This doesn't mean you're fake, it means you're human. Mimicry is not inherently bad. It can create empathy, unity, shared understanding. But the danger is forgetting that you're doing it. The danger is living someone else's life, dreaming someone else's dreams, fighting someone else's battles, all while calling them your own. So ask yourself which parts of you are real and which were borrowed. And more importantly, are you okay with the answer? Because the moment you stop questioning what you're imitating is the moment you become a mirror, not a mind. But what if the words you're using to describe yourself aren't yours either? What if even your identity is just a label handed to you, one that quietly cages your potential? Have you ever stopped to think about the label you wear every day? Not the ones stitched into your clothes, but the invisible ones, the ones people assign you, or worse, the ones you've assigned yourself. Smart, lazy, introvert, addict, victim, alpha. Each one a single word, yet heavy enough to anchor your entire identity. Labels feel like shortcuts, a way to simplify complexity, to understand at a glance. But here's the catch. Labels don't just describe who you are, they trap you in who you've been. The moment you accept a label, you begin to act like it's true, even when it's not. You build your choices, your relationships, your entire self around it. A kid told he's a problem at school stops trying to be anything else. A woman labeled too emotional starts silencing her instincts. A man praised for being stoic learns to swallow his grief, convinced its strength. It starts subtly. You hear it once, maybe twice. Then it becomes a pattern. Then it becomes belief. And finally, it becomes behavior. The label stops being something you wear. It becomes the skin you live in. Worse, labels don't only trap you. They guide how others treat you. A person branded as difficult at work finds their concerns dismissed, no matter how valid. A patient labeled anxious may never have their physical symptoms taken seriously. A teenager tagged as rebellious is punished before they even misstep. And each time the world responds to the label instead of the person, that person steps deeper into the role they've been assigned. This isn't just social, it's neurological. The human brain craves consistency. Once an identity forms, even a painful one, the brain fights to maintain it. It fears change more than it fears suffering. That's why people cling to labels that hurt them. I'm always the screw-up. I'm unlovable. The brain would rather be right than free. Think about how labels shape your expectations. If you believe you're a failure, you won't take risks. You'll see failure waiting at every corner. If you see yourself as broken, you'll interpret every setback as confirmation. And the world will keep feeding that loop, rewarding your conformity to the label you didn't ask for. Even positive labels become prisons. Gifted students feel pressure to never fail. Strong people aren't allowed to cry. Successful people must keep winning, even when they're falling apart inside. These labels sound flattering, but they're still cages, because they define you not as you are, but as you're expected to be. What's even more sinister is how quickly labels shift from individual to collective. People don't just label themselves, they label entire groups: criminal, immigrant, addict, liberal, conservative. The moment a label becomes collective, empathy disappears. You stop seeing a person and start seeing a category. That's when injustice flourishes. That's when violence feels justified. The system thrives on labels. It sorts, categorizes, and manages people based on them. Labels streamline control. A labeled person is predictable, manageable, and easy to dismiss. They fit neatly into forms, into algorithms, into prison beds. The system doesn't want you fluid, evolving, or unpredictable. It wants you labeled, locked in, and obedient. But what if you could rip the label off? What if you stopped saying "I am" and started saying "I feel," or "I've experienced," or "I've struggled with"? Those phrases leave room for change. They make you human again, not a product line. You are not your worst moment. You are not the story someone else wrote for you. Escaping the grip of labels takes courage. It means disappointing people who've grown comfortable with your role. It means losing the certainty of a neat identity. It means standing in the wilderness of "I don't know who I am" and choosing to build yourself from scratch. But it also means freedom, because you are not a fixed point. You are not a diagnosis, a stereotype, or a brand. You are an unfolding process, a question still being answered. The moment you refuse to be defined is the moment you begin to live. And once you realize that, you'll never look at a label the same way again. Because the second you stop letting labels define you, you also stop letting them define what you say yes to. But what if every yes is a doorway, and some of them lead straight to regret? You say yes because you think it's the right thing to do, because you were taught that saying yes is noble, cooperative, generous, kind. You say yes to be helpful, to be liked, to be seen as dependable. But behind every yes is a risk, one most people never see until it's far too late. Every yes is a contract. Not always formal, not always written, but binding nonetheless. A yes commits your time, your energy, your attention. And yet, most people give away their yes like loose change, flinging them out to avoid awkwardness, obligation, or guilt. They say yes out of reflex, not intention, out of fear, not conviction. But here's the danger. Every yes slowly erodes your boundaries. One yes to stay late at work becomes 2, then 10, until your evenings no longer belong to you. One yes to a favor you didn't have time for becomes the default expectation. And soon, you're living a life that doesn't even feel like yours anymore. This is how control begins, quietly, politely, under the guise of cooperation. People don't overpower you with demands. They wait for your permission, and your yes is the doorway. Once opened, it's rarely closed without consequence. You become the person who always helps, who never complains, who shows up even when you're breaking inside. And people start to rely on your silence, on your yes. Not out of malice, but because you trained them to. You taught them that your needs come second, that your limits are flexible, that you will always absorb the burden. The risk isn't just exhaustion. It's the slow, invisible death of agency. You begin to lose sight of what you want, what you need. Your decisions become reactions, not choices. You no longer ask yourself if you want to do something. You only ask if you can. And over time, you stop trusting yourself. You forget what it feels like to want something without calculating its cost to others. You feel guilt when you say no, even when no is the only sane answer. You become a person ruled by perceived obligation, not in a direction. But why is saying yes so hard to resist? Because we're conditioned to believe that no is rejection, that it disappoints, offends, disrupts. Saying no feels like conflict, and conflict feels unsafe. We're taught to associate our value with our willingness to accommodate, to be agreeable, to say yes, even when it hurts, and society rewards it. The yes men climb corporate ladders. The agreeable partner avoids confrontation. The obliging friend is loved for their reliability. But under that praise is something darker: exploitation dressed in applause. They'll call you selfless. They'll say you're amazing, dependable, loyal. But what they really mean is this: you are easy to use. You are unlikely to push back. You are convenient. And the worst part? You start to believe it, that your worth is tied to your willingness to say yes, that having boundaries makes you cold, that prioritizing yourself is betrayal. So you keep saying yes, even when you're exhausted, even when you're angry, even when every fiber in your body is screaming, until one day you can't anymore. The cost becomes too high. Your health cracks. Your relationships corrode. Your sense of self dissolves. And you wonder how you got here, how you became a ghost in your own life. But this is how it happens, one yes at a time. So ask yourself, what are you agreeing to out of fear? What do you say yes to because no feels dangerous? Because until you answer that, your life won't really be yours. Every yes is a fork in the road, one that either leads toward empowerment or away from it. Choose carefully, because the next one might cost more than you can afford. And once you understand the hidden dangers of saying yes, you'll be ready to see how curiosity, innocent on the surface, can become its own trap. It starts with a question you didn't even realize you asked. You click, you stare, you lean forward just a little. The world around you dims for half a second as your attention sharpens. You don't know why, but something inside you, something ancient, quiet and always watching, just leaned in. That's the moment curiosity took your guard. It never kicks down the door. It whispers a notification on your phone, a strange sound in the middle of the night, a headline that reads like a riddle. You aren't pulled into it by force, you fall willingly. Curiosity doesn't ask permission. It seeps into your mind and makes you want more before you even realize you're hooked. Why does that happen? Why does your brain betray its defenses the moment something feels unknown? Because the unknown isn't just a gap in knowledge, it's a gap in control. The brain, for all its power, is addicted to patterns. It finds safety in the predictable, but the unknown, the unfamiliar, that's a rupture, a loose thread in the tapestry. And once you see it, you can't stop pulling. Your mind races to close the gap, to fill in the missing piece, to make the discomfort vanish. You need to know because not knowing feels like a threat. Curiosity is your mind's panic to restore order disguised as interest. That's why it's so easy to manipulate. All it takes is a fragment, a secret half revealed, a suggestion of danger, a question that starts but never ends. That's all someone needs to bypass your skepticism and sneak into your attention like a thief in the night. It's not logic that opens the door, it's intrigue. You want to know what happens next. You want to solve it. You want to understand. And that's where control begins. Because the moment you're curious, you're vulnerable. You stop defending. You start chasing. And in that chase, you'll ignore warning signs, skip steps, override caution. You'll believe what's convenient. You'll overlook what's suspicious. Curiosity doesn't just bypass your guard, it turns you into your own captor. You willingly walk into the trap. Marketers understand this. Propagandists thrive on it. Cult leaders, illusionists, con artists, they don't come at you with threats. They come at you with curiosity. They pose questions they already know the answers to. They offer mysteries they've scripted to resolve on their terms. They feed you just enough to keep you hungry, and just confused enough to keep you dependent. And it works. Because once you've invested your attention, your time, your identity into unraveling something, you become afraid to stop. You don't want to admit you were wrong, misled, manipulated. So you double down. You dig deeper. You follow farther. Curiosity becomes obsession, and obsession blinds. You don't ask, "Is this true?" anymore. You ask, "What's next?" Curiosity doesn't die easily. It feeds on itself. The more you learn, the more you need to know. The more answers you get, the more questions arise. That endless loop of almost understanding keeps you hooked longer than fear ever could. You're no longer seeking truth. You're seeking resolution. And resolution, in the hands of the wrong person, can be weaponized. That's the hidden cost of curiosity. It turns your mind into a maze you don't realize you're trapped inside. It's why people fall for scams, why they join extremist groups, why conspiracy theories grow like cancer in the brain. Because they promise that delicious thrill of discovery, the feeling that you're on the edge of something big, that if you just follow the next clue, read the next post, watch the next video, you'll finally get it. You'll finally know the truth. But the truth isn't the goal, your attention is. Once your guard is down, your mind is open, not just to knowledge, but to manipulation. The same door that curiosity opens for wisdom, it also opens for control. And most of us can't tell the difference until it's too late. So next time you feel that pull, next time your eyes widen, your breath shortens, your mind leans in, pause. Ask yourself, what exactly are you being drawn into? Who benefits from your curiosity? What doors are being opened, and what's waiting behind them? Because curiosity may feel like freedom, but more often than not, it's just a leash made of questions, and sometimes the bait isn't the problem, it's how far you'll follow it into the dark. Now, what if I told you that even curiosity itself isn't your biggest vulnerability, but the way you're distracted by it might be? What if I told you that your focus isn't being stolen, it's being sold, not in some metaphorical, poetic sense. Literally, your attention, your ability to stay mentally anchored in one task, one thought, one moment, is the most valuable commodity in the world. And someone is bidding on it right now. Every ding from your phone, every autoplay video, every swipeable headline is part of a carefully engineered assault. You're not casually browsing the world, you're being broken, fractured into pieces. Because the truth is, distraction isn't accidental. It's a system, a business model, and it's working exactly as intended. You've felt it before, haven't you? That sick, hollow sensation when you realize you've been scrolling for 40 minutes, maybe an hour, with no memory of what you even saw. It's not just time you've lost, it's cognitive residue. Your mind, like a cluttered desk, now scattered with irrelevant fragments. Thoughts you didn't choose, stories you didn't ask for, noise masquerading as information. And it doesn't stop when you put the phone down. Your brain keeps cycling, twitching, craving that next hit of stimulation. Because distraction isn't passive, it leaves scars. Every time your focus is broken, your ability to return to deep thought erodes just a little more. It's like repeatedly tearing muscle without ever letting it heal. But the damage goes deeper. Distraction weakens your memory. Your decisions get worse. You miss subtle emotions in conversations. You forget names, overlook nuance, lose the thread of who you are and what you value. Focus is the glue that holds the self together. Without it, you drift, unmoored, easier to manipulate. And that's not a bug, it's the goal. Because when you can't focus, you can't resist. You can't question. You can't think for yourself in any sustained way. You consume, react, obey. You live in other people's timelines, other people's narratives, never quite sure where your own begins. Consider how notifications are designed. Bright colors, variable rewards, unpredictable timing, mirroring slot machines. A psychological jackpot system designed to keep you hooked. Your brain, wired for survival, becomes addicted to novelty, not because it's better, but because it's unpredictable. Then there's multitasking. The lie you've been sold about being efficient, while checking emails, replying to messages, and trying to focus on something meaningful. In reality, your brain isn't multitasking. It's rapidly switching and paying a massive price for every jump. Each switch causes friction, fatigue, and reduced mental clarity. The result? You feel busy, but accomplish less. You feel stimulated, but become dumber. Distraction masquerades as productivity, but it's actually paralysis. And the irony, the more distracted you are, the more ashamed you feel. You blame yourself. You call yourself lazy, undisciplined, unfocused. But this isn't a personal failure. It's a professionally designed system. Entire teams of engineers, psychologists, and behaviorists work to make you addictively distractible. They exploit your biology, monetize your attention, and leave you feeling broken. But the real threat isn't just lost productivity, it's lost sovereignty. If you can't control your attention, you can't control your thoughts. If you can't control your thoughts, someone else will. Your beliefs, desires, fears, they'll no longer come from you. They'll come from a feed, an algorithm, a sales pitch. And slowly, subtly, distraction becomes your master. You start a project, then stop. You plan your future, then doubt it. You read a book, then reread the same page 5 times. Your focus, once a powerful weapon, is now blunt, dulled by constant interruption. You become someone who starts but never finishes, who dreams but never executes, who exists in fragments, constantly pulled away from meaning, from truth, from yourself. That's the final theft. Distraction doesn't just steal your time, it steals your ability to want deeply. It hijacks your hunger for purpose and replaces it with shallow urges. You stop pursuing goals that matter and start chasing stimulation that doesn't. And the longer this continues, the less you notice. Because distraction also steals your awareness of being distracted. You forget what clarity felt like, what silence sounded like, what uninterrupted thought could uncover. So ask yourself, what have you not thought about today because you were too distracted to notice? Because the real danger of distraction isn't what it shows you, it's what it hides from you. And often what it hides is yourself. But there's a deeper fear beneath all of this, one that's quieter, crueler, and much harder to face. What if the voice whispering distraction isn't just from outside? What if it's one you've trained yourself to listen to? What if the real saboteur is the threat you whisper to yourself? You sit in a crowded room. No one is looking at you, no one is speaking your name, and yet you're on edge. There's no danger, no immediate threat, just a whisper, not out loud, not from another person. It's quieter than that, more private. It comes from you. You're not even aware you said it, but it echoes in the way your shoulders tense, in the way you hesitate to speak up, in the way you lower your eyes before anyone says a word. This is the threat you whisper to yourself. It's not always in words. Sometimes it's a memory, a mistake you made 10 years ago that no one else remembers, but you do. Every detail, or it's a mental image, flashing just long enough to sting, of failure, of rejection, of humiliation. You feel the sensation before the story finishes forming in your mind. Most people call this self-doubt. That sounds mild, manageable, but this is something deeper, more insidious. It's not just a lack of confidence, it's a quiet conditioning, a threat you've learned to internalize, repeat, and enforce. It tells you don't try, you'll just embarrass yourself. Don't speak, you'll be judged. Don't hope, you'll be disappointed. It doesn't shout, it doesn't even argue, it just insinuates. And because it wears your voice, it feels true. This is how control works, at the most intimate level, not from governments or corporations, not from parents or peers, but from the very person who lives inside your skin. The threat is you, because somewhere along the way, you were taught to be your own warden. Maybe it started with shame, a parent's disapproving glance, a teacher's public correction, a friend's mocking laughter. Small things, almost forgettable, but they echo. And over time, they harden into reflexes. Your brain learns avoid risk, avoid pain. It builds walls so automatic, you don't even notice you're inside them. Eventually, you start enforcing them. Without needing anyone else to punish you, you do it yourself. You police your ambitions. You shrink your presence. You punish yourself with guilt, anxiety, and regret before the world even gets a chance to. This is the true genius of social conditioning. It doesn't need guards when you've internalized the prison. The system doesn't have to break you. It just teaches you to break yourself. 1,000 tiny threats, whispered daily, reinforcing the same command: stay small. You stay in the relationship, not because it's healthy, but because the whisper says you won't find better. You stay in the job, not because you're passionate, but because the whisper says you're lucky to have anything at all. You silence your opinions, not because you're wrong, but because the whisper says your voice isn't worth hearing. And if anyone dares to challenge this whisper, to tell you you're more capable, more deserving, more powerful, you recoil, not because you disagree, but because you're afraid to believe them. Because belief invites risk, and risk is where the whisper becomes loudest. But here's the most dangerous part: that whisper doesn't stay internal, it spreads. Once you've absorbed it, you start to pass it on. You discourage others from taking risks. You dismiss dreamers as naive. You resent those who act boldly, not because they threaten the fragile illusion you've built around your own fear. So the cycle continues, not from cruelty, but from protection, from a desire to avoid pain, to preempt disappointment, to shield yourself from failure by never trying in the first place. But what if the whisper is wrong? What if it's not your voice at all, but an echo of every person, system and structure that ever benefited from your silence? What if the threat is not a truth, but a trick? One designed to keep you manageable, predictable, easy to control. Because here's what the whisper fears more than anything: your defiance. The moment you hear it and choose not to obey. The moment you step forward, even though it says to sit down. The moment you risk, fail, stumble, and rise anyway. That's when you break the spell, not when you silence the whisper, but when you stop mistaking it for the truth. When you recognize it for what it really is, a voice trained to fear your own power. Because the greatest threat was never the world outside. It was always the one inside, the one that convinced you to give up before the world even had the chance to reject you. The threat you whisper to yourself, and that means you have a choice. What if you answered it? What if you whispered back? And maybe, just maybe, that whisper could become something else. Something that doesn't keep you small, but dares you to grow. And speaking of what dares you, what if the warning you hear today is the very thing that guarantees your failure tomorrow? You're driving at night, headlights cutting through the fog. You're not speeding, you're not distracted, but a sign flashes, deer crossing. Just those two words. A passive warning, an abstract threat. And in that moment, something changes. You tense, your grip tightens. You slow down without thinking. You start scanning the trees for movement, as if the warning has already made the danger real. That's the power of a warning. Not because it informs you, but because it rewires your anticipation. It changes your behavior before anything even happens. The warning isn't just a message, it's a spell. It doesn't tell you what will happen, it tells you what might. And in doing so, it plants a seed, one that grows into fear, caution, and obedience. One that reshapes your choices before you've made them. This isn't about signs on highways. It's about the subtle, psychological architecture of control. Warnings are preemptive manipulations, and the moment you hear one, your mind begins constructing a reality in which the threat is already looming. You've felt it before. A doctor warns you about your blood pressure. Suddenly, every heartbeat feels suspect. A teacher warns you about failing. Now you study not to learn, but to avoid shame. A parent warns you that the world is dangerous, and suddenly, trust dies in the cradle. A warning doesn't just inform, it frames. It tells you what to fear, what to expect, what to avoid. And once that frame is in place, you live inside it. Think about how warnings work in social settings. Don't say that around him. Be careful how you dress. Don't make waves. Each one is a behavioral leash slipped around your neck in the name of protection. You start curating yourself, silencing parts of who you are, and eventually you forget the leash is even there. That's how effective warnings are. They become invisible. And the irony, most of them are never followed by actual threats, but they don't have to be. Because once fear is installed, enforcement becomes unnecessary. You do it to yourself. Consider this. A warning triggers a simulation. You visualize the consequence. You feel it. You rehearse the disaster over and over in your mind. And eventually, that imagined scenario begins to feel more real than your actual present. You become a prisoner of what hasn't happened. Think of a child warned constantly about strangers. Don't talk to them. Don't trust them. What happens? They become hesitant, avoidant. Even kind faces start to look dangerous. The child wasn't attacked. They were warned. But the fear shaped them just the same. Warnings carve scars without wounds. And there's something else. Warnings imply surveillance. If someone warns you not to do something, you instinctively assume they're watching, that you're being monitored, judged, preemptively punished. Do you self-police? You internalize the threat, and it never leaves you. A warning is the ghost of punishment. Now scale that up. Society runs on warnings. Think about credit scores, legal disclaimers, and social backlash. Every system of power issues warnings about taxes, about law-breaking, about saying the wrong thing. They don't need to arrest everyone. They just need you to believe they might. The most efficient kind of power doesn't enforce, it warns. And the most obedient kind of citizen isn't punished, it's preemptively afraid. That's why a warning seals your fate, not because the threat is real, but because your response to the warning becomes real. You adjust, you contort, you preemptively surrender, just in case. And here's the twist. The warning might not even be about you. It could be directed at someone else. But once you hear it, your subconscious absorbs it. Don't be like them. That's what happens to people who cross the line. It becomes a quiet ultimatum. Conform or risk it all. You see this in workplaces, in schools, in friendships. One person is reprimanded publicly, and the rest fall in line silently. Not because they were guilty, but because they saw what happens to those who aren't careful. That's the chilling power of a warning. It doesn't need to be personal to be effective. Warnings shape culture. They dictate norms. They determine what is safe to say, feel, or think. And eventually, they shape identity. You begin to believe that your instincts are dangerous, that your impulses will betray you, that your desires are risky. So you bury them. And what's left is a version of you carefully crafted to avoid danger, real or imagined. This is how control becomes psychological. No handcuffs, no bars, just warnings, and the unspoken consequences they carry. Because a warning doesn't need to prove itself. It only needs to echo quietly, repeatedly, until you stop questioning it and start living by it. And that's the trap. The moment you adjust your behavior in anticipation of a punishment that hasn't happened, the warning has done its job. Your freedom wasn't taken. You gave it away. But here's something few people ever ask. If your instincts are so dangerous, why are you rewarded for suppressing them? And maybe that question is exactly what you've been trained not to ask. Because next, we're going to explore why you follow without asking why. You're walking through a crowd. Everyone's moving in the same direction. You don't know why. You didn't ask. But you follow because that's what we do. That's what we're taught to do. You don't remember the moment you surrendered your curiosity. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It just slipped away. Somewhere along the way, asking why became dangerous. It started when you were young. You asked too many questions, and someone called you difficult. You pointed out contradictions, and someone said you were being rude. You questioned authority, and someone labeled you a troublemaker. Slowly, you learned to stay quiet, not because you agreed, but because disagreement had consequences. Social ones, emotional ones, maybe even physical ones. So you stopped asking. You accepted that rules were rules, that the teacher knew best, that adults were always right. You learned that obedience earned praise and questioning earned punishment. And like everyone else, you started to confuse silence with wisdom, stillness with virtue. You weren't taught how to think, you were taught how to behave. And behavior, not truth, became the goal. As you got older, it didn't get better. It got worse. The expectations just got bigger. The stakes got higher. In school, you memorized instead of understanding. At work, you followed policies you knew were broken. In relationships, you played roles instead of living realities. You became an actor in a life scripted by other people's expectations, other people's comfort zones, other people's fears, and all along, the one question that could have set you free stayed buried. Why? Why do we wear clothes that make us miserable? Why do we work jobs that make us hate waking up? Why do we swallow beliefs we don't fully understand, follow laws we never agreed to, and march in unison with people who aren't even watching where they're going? Because we were trained to. Because questioning is seen as resistance. And resistance is punished. And the punishment isn't always obvious. Sometimes it's social isolation. Sometimes it's ridicule. Sometimes it's just that look that says, don't rock the boat. So you don't. You stop asking why the boat is heading toward the waterfall. You just sit back and smile. It's not because you're stupid, it's because you're scared. Scared of losing what little comfort you have. Scared of standing alone. Scared of finding out that everything you trusted was built on sand. But here's the part that really stings. Those who lead the crowd, they count on that fear. They build systems that rely on your compliance. Not your understanding, not your agreement, just your willingness to follow. Politics, religion, education. They all have hierarchies. They all have sacred truths. And the moment you ask why, you shake the foundation. Not just of the idea, but of the power behind it. And power doesn't like being questioned. So instead of being taught how to think critically, we're trained to think safely. We internalize authority. We self-censor. We turn our own minds into prisons. The bars aren't made of iron. They're made of stories. Stories like "that's just the way things are," or "don't ask stupid questions," or the most paralyzing one of all: who are you to question anything? But here's the truth. You are someone to question everything. Because if you don't, someone else will answer for you. And their answer will serve them, not you. Following without asking why doesn't make you noble. It makes you manageable, predictable, controlled, and worst of all, it makes you replaceable. Ask yourself, how many beliefs do you hold that you've never truly examined? How many rules do you follow out of habit, not conviction? How many times have you looked at a situation that felt wrong, but stayed silent because everyone else was silent too? You think you're safe in the crowd, but the crowd can't protect you from the consequences of blind obedience. History has proven that over and over again. You follow the crowd not because they're right, but because they're there, because you don't want to be alone. But truth often begins in solitude. It begins with the one person willing to say, "Wait, why are we doing this?" And that person, that could be you. You don't have to be loud. You don't have to be rebellious. You just have to be awake, curious, brave enough to stop walking when everyone else keeps going. Brave enough to turn around, because sometimes the only difference between a follower and a free thinker is a question. And speaking of dangerous questions, what happens when your hope isn't just a feeling, but a weapon used to keep you obedient? What if the reason you keep obeying isn't because you're weak, but because you're hopeful? Hope is often painted as noble, inspirational, a flicker of light in the darkness. But what if hope isn't just a light? What if it's also a leash, a mechanism not for freedom, but for control? Hope tells you that change is coming, that your hard work will pay off, that your patience will be rewarded. It whispers just a little longer every time you feel like giving up. But here's the catch. The more you believe in hope, the more you're willing to endure, to wait, to obey. Think about your job. You keep showing up, grinding through monotony, sacrificing your time, your health, your dreams, because you believe in a future promotion, a raise, a break. You hope it'll get better, that they'll notice, that one day all your obedience will make sense. But what if that day never comes? What if it was never going to? Hope keeps you from walking away. It doesn't just keep you compliant, it makes you grateful for the very system that exploits you. When you're hopeful, even suffering becomes meaningful. You reframe pain as a test, exploitation as experience. You romanticize endurance, and in doing so you become easier to manage. Governments rely on hope, hope that voting will change things, that justice will be served, that your voice matters. So you participate. You obey the laws. You wait for reform, and when nothing changes, you wait some more. Because hope convinces you that obedience is the path to progress. But progress rarely comes from obedience. It comes from disruption, from saying enough, from rejecting the endless dangling of carrots that never get any closer. Even relationships aren't immune. You stay in toxic dynamics because of hope. Hope that they'll change, that things will go back to how they were, that the version of them you fell in love with will reappear. But often, that version never existed. It was a projection, a promise, not a person. And yet you stay, you comply, you make excuses. All because hope tells you to. The most dangerous kind of obedience is the kind that feels like virtue, the kind that wears the mask of patience, loyalty, perseverance. Because it doesn't feel like submission, it feels like strength. You tell yourself you're being resilient. In reality, you're being conditioned. Hope isn't always voluntary. It's instilled, cultivated. You're bombarded with messages that tell you to believe in better, Stories of rags to riches, of late blooming success, of miracles. These stories aren't just entertainment, they're instruction manuals. They teach you to endure injustice, now for a reward you may never receive. And here's the real trick. The system doesn't even have to deliver. It just has to maintain your belief that it could. That possibility alone is enough to keep you in line. Hope creates a kind of prison with invisible walls. One where the door is always just about to open. One where you hold the key but never quite use it. Because using it means giving up the dream. It means facing the uncomfortable possibility that no one's coming, that there's no grand reward, that obedience in itself leads nowhere. And so you wait, you behave, you obey, you believe. Not because you're powerless, but because you think hope is power. But what if it's not? What if real power lies in the refusal to wait, in abandoning the hope that's used to manipulate you? What if letting go of hope is the first real act of freedom? Sometimes the thing that keeps you stuck isn't your fear or your weakness or your ignorance, it's your hope. But what happens when you realize that the role you've been playing all along was never yours to choose? You're at work, or maybe a family dinner, a familiar place, comfortable, harmless, and yet, without realizing it, you're already slipping into character. You laugh a little too loudly. You nod even when you disagree. You play the part that's expected of you. But here's the twist. You didn't rehearse for this role. No one gave you a script, yet you perform flawlessly. Because the truth is, you've been trained for this your entire life. From childhood, you were conditioned to adapt, to read the room, to mirror what others wanted from you. Teachers praised you when you were quiet. Parents smiled when you were polite. Friends accepted you when you fit in. And every time you adjusted yourself to meet those expectations, you were rewarded with approval, with love, with safety. So you learned the role. Maybe you're the reliable one, the peacekeeper, the overachiever. Maybe you're the funny one, the caretaker, the listener. But here's the disturbing part. You didn't choose this role. It was handed to you, shaped by others, reinforced by subtle cues, and eventually internalized so deeply you forgot it was just an act. And the scariest part, the more you play it, the more you believe it's who you really are. But pause for a moment and ask yourself, when was the last time you said something that made others uncomfortable, not to be rude, but to be honest? When was the last time you acted purely for yourself, not filtered through the expectations of those around you? Chances are, those moments are rare, because stepping out of character feels like betrayal, like danger. This isn't about people pleasing, it's deeper. It's about identity being hijacked by the roles we perform, and every system, family, school, religion, work relies on this. Because roles make people predictable. The self-sacrificing mother, the obedient student, the agreeable co-worker. When everyone knows their place, the machine runs smoothly. No resistance, no disruption. Just quiet compliance hidden behind smiles. Even rebellion is sometimes just another role. The edgy outsider, the tortured artist, the misunderstood genius. These two are characters that society tolerates, even celebrates, as long as they follow the script. So what happens if you stop performing? If you stop laughing when the joke isn't funny? If you stop agreeing just to avoid conflict? At first, things unravel. People get uncomfortable. The system reacts. You're told you've changed, become difficult, selfish even. That discomfort, it's the sound of the role breaking apart. And that's when something real begins. Because underneath the mask, there is someone else. Someone untrained. Raw, maybe awkward, maybe unsure, but real. And every time you silence that version of yourself, you bury a piece of your truth. And over time, that silence becomes a prison. The role you play without knowing isn't just an act, it's a defense mechanism, a survival strategy. But what once protected you is now the very thing keeping you from growing. Because the role doesn't evolve, it repeats, like a loop. And the longer you stay in it, the harder it becomes to remember who you were before the performance started. And the world, it loves you more when you stay in character. It rewards consistency, not authenticity, but the reward is hollow, applause for a version of you that doesn't really exist. So ask yourself, who are you when no one is watching? Who are you when there's no audience to please? Because until you answer that, you're still playing a role, still acting, still performing in a drama written by expectations you never agreed to. And the most unsettling part, you're not alone. Almost everyone you know is doing it too. Smiling through roles they didn't choose, clinging to scripts that suffocate them, terrified that breaking character will make them unlovable. But the truth is, breaking character is the only way to ever be loved for who you really are. So start small. Pause before you nod. Speak when you disagree. Let silence fill the space where laughter used to live, and watch what happens. Some people will draw closer, others will recoil. But you'll begin to see who actually sees you. Not the role, not the act, but you. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. Once you feel it, you'll never be satisfied with applause for a role again. Because real connection doesn't happen when you're performing. It happens when you finally stop. But what if the very questions you ask are the next layer of the trap? What if asking is just another form of obeying? You're walking down the hallway at work, and your manager spots you from across the room. With a smile that doesn't quite reach their eyes, they ask, "Hey, do you think you could stay late tonight?" That's not a question. It feels like one. It sounds like one. But deep down, you already know the answer is expected to be yes. Not because you want to, not because it's reasonable, but because of how the question was framed. Soft, polite, but loaded with obligation. This is the subtle sorcery of language. When questions stop being inquiries and become instruments. When asking becomes a command wrapped in suggestion. When the illusion of choice masks the reality of coercion. We grow up believing questions are neutral, that they invite participation, spark curiosity, open doors, but not all questions are created equal. Some are weapons. Some are traps. Take, for instance, "You're not going to disappoint me, are you?" That's not really a question. It's a test, a manipulation, a loaded emotional package disguised as a request for input. It hijacks your guilt, your desire to please, your fear of rejection, all in one breath. Or don't you want to do the right thing? That doesn't just challenge your decision. It challenges your identity. It draws a line between good and bad, moral and immoral, and dares you to step on the wrong side. Not because you disagree, but because you fear what the answer will say about you. And then there's the most dangerous kind. Wouldn't you agree that this one doesn't even give you space to think? It pulls you in with an invisible rope. The phrasing already assumes consensus. Disagreeing feels rude. It feels combative. It feels like a betrayal of social harmony. These questions operate like psychological sleight of hand. They create the illusion of dialogue while enforcing compliance. You think you're choosing, but the script was written for you long before you opened your mouth. Parents do this to children. Are you really going to wear that? A question, yes, but not one that invites honest expression. It's a correction, disguised as concern. An attack, masked as advice. Leaders do it to the masses. Don't you want to feel safe? The answer is obviously yes, but the cost of that safety is rarely laid out plainly. security in exchange for freedom, order in exchange for obedience. These questions don't seek truth. They seek control through consensus. Even your inner voice learns the trick. Why can't I ever get it right? It sounds like self-reflection, but it's a whip. It's not asking for an answer. It's delivering a sentence. You're not exploring, you're condemning yourself. The brilliance of these manipulative questions lies in their deniability. If you object, you seem paranoid. I was just asking, they'll say. Don't be so sensitive. But you felt it, the pressure, the shame, the invisible hand guiding your response. It's social engineering at its most elegant. The directive is hidden, the authority is disguised, and the obedience is voluntary. At least, that's what it feels like. But what if you started noticing these linguistic traps? What if you paused the next time someone asked? Don't you think it would be better and really dissected what they were saying? Not just with words, but with tone, context, subtext. You might begin to see the blueprint beneath the conversation. The architecture of influence built into our everyday exchanges. The way a single phrase can override consent, twist morality, and shape behavior, all without raising a single alarm. This is the power of questions turned into orders. They don't shout, they whisper. They don't demand, they imply. And their effectiveness depends entirely on you not noticing. But once you do notice, everything changes. You realize how often you've been coerced without knowing. How many choices were never really yours. How easily language becomes a leash, especially when it pretends to be a handshake. And now you have to ask yourself the real question. How many times have you said yes when what you really meant was I don't feel like I have a choice? Because if you can't answer that, someone else already has. But what happens when the people asking the questions aren't even visible? When you're following a voice that never needed to speak out loud at all? You're walking down the street, headed nowhere in particular. It feels like your path is yours, your pace, your decisions, your direction. But what if none of that is true? What if every step you take is being guided not by laws, not by peers, but by people you'll never meet? People whose names you'll never know, whose faces remain unseen, yet whose influence penetrates your life so thoroughly, you mistake it for your own will. You think you choose your career, but why do so many people aspire to the same 10 jobs? Why do your dreams often look like everyone else's? Maybe it's because someone somewhere curated your desires long before you were old enough to want anything. They built the blueprint of success, framed the rules of happiness, and sold it as free will. You didn't design your aspirations, you downloaded them. Look at the choices you make every day. What to eat, what to wear, what to believe. You're flooded with options, and yet, strangely, everyone ends up making similar decisions. Fast food over home cooking, convenience over contemplation, safety over self-expression. This isn't coincidence, it's choreography. The illusion of choice is the most elegant form of control. And behind that illusion, unseen architects who craft culture, steer markets, and shape your values without ever appearing in the frame. Who are they? Not politicians, not influencers. Those are just avatars, distractions. The real power lies with the invisible hands, media executives who dictate the narratives you consume, corporate strategists who determine your appetites, psychological consultants who know exactly how long you'll scroll before buying something you didn't even know you needed. They don't force, they nudge. They don't scream, they whisper. Quiet enough that you think the voice is your own, and it's not just what you buy, it's what you fear, what you avoid, what you shame. Entire generations have been trained to distrust themselves. You're taught to second-guess your instincts, defer to the expert, obey the algorithm. You internalize their voices. Soon, their preferences become your morals. Their anxieties become your limits. Their biases become your compass. They don't need to rule you. They just need to distract you long enough that you forget to look for the exit. And here's the most disturbing part. The more intelligent you are, the more effective their control. Because smart people crave meaning, structure, narrative. They're more likely to rationalize the cage they live in, to believe in the sophistication of the system that subdues them. You don't rebel against what you think you understand. You defend it. You worship it. Even rebellion itself is co-opted. You're encouraged to be edgy, but not too edgy. Outspoken, but only within boundaries. The system gives you just enough room to scream without ever touching the walls. So you feel heard, you feel free. But it's containment disguised as empowerment. They've pre-written your rebellion and sold it to you as authenticity. And the worst part? You love them for it. You thank the companies that spy on you for making life convenient. You applaud the leaders who manufacture crises for keeping you safe. You idolize celebrities whose fame is engineered by focus groups and financial backing. You treat the designers of your prison like saviors, mistaking your leash for a lifeline. But if you paused, really paused, you'd begin to feel it. The friction, the subtle disconnect between who you are and who you're supposed to be. That quiet hum of artificiality that pulses through every so-called decision. You'd begin to notice the patterns, the coincidences that aren't. You'd realize that your path was never yours. Not entirely, you were born into a maze. And the architects, they stay invisible by design. So ask yourself, if you've been guided all along, gently, silently, almost lovingly, what happens when the guide is no longer benevolent? What happens when the unseen hand turns cold? Because sometimes the most dangerous leaders are the ones you never even knew were leading. And if you think that's unsettling, wait until you hear what happens when a secret promise becomes the key to your obedience. You make a deal without saying a word. Not a contract, not a handshake, not even a nod. Just a silent agreement, buried so deep in your subconscious that you forget it ever happened. But it changes everything. This is the trap of a secret promise. It starts when you're young. You watch the world, notice what gets rewarded and what gets punished. You see smiles when you stay quiet, tension when you question, and withdrawal when you express too much emotion. Slowly, without realizing it, you make a vow to be agreeable, to avoid conflict, to stay small if it means staying safe. You promise something to the people around you, but also something darker to yourself. I won't be a burden. I won't show weakness. I'll never let them see me struggle. These aren't spoken aloud. That's what makes them so dangerous. A spoken promise you can remember, revisit, even break. But a secret promise, that becomes part of your identity. It hardens into instinct. And soon it starts making choices for you. You decline opportunities not because you aren't ready, but because success would violate the vow you made to never outshine anyone. You stay in toxic relationships because you once promised you'd never abandon someone, even if they hurt you. You sabotage yourself, quietly, consistently, because some buried corner of your mind still believes pain equals loyalty. You're not being noble. You're being obedient to a deal you don't even remember making. The world praises you for it. They call you reliable, selfless, humble. They never see the cost. They don't see the nights you lie awake, haunted by the weight of everyone else's expectations. They don't see the moments you nearly said something real and swallowed it instead. They don't see the parts of you that had to die to keep that promise alive. But the scariest part, you keep the promise even when no one's watching. No one's holding you to it anymore. The people you made the deal with have moved on, or maybe they never existed in the way you imagined. And yet, you remain loyal because a secret promise doesn't need an audience. It only needs a host. Your identity becomes fused with it. You can't tell where the vow ends and you begin. You protect it, defend it, build your life around it. And if someone tries to confront it, if someone says, "Why do you always do this?" you feel attacked, exposed, like someone's trying to tear away your skin, because they are. That promise is your skin now. But deep down, there's a war happening. One part of you is desperate to break free, to say what you really think, to ask for what you really want, to be seen. But the other part, it's terrified. Because if you break the promise, who are you? What if the only reason anyone ever loved you was because you kept quiet, stayed kind, didn't need too much, so you stay trapped? Not in a cage made by others, but in a cage you locked yourself in. And here's the final twist. That promise you made, it was never required. No one asked for it. Not really. You interpreted a few moments of discomfort, of rejection, of fear, and you built a whole code of behavior around them. A fortress, a persona. And now it's choking you. You keep thinking the problem is that people don't appreciate you, that you're not getting the love, recognition, or freedom you deserve. But the real problem is the vow itself. Until you break that secret promise, nothing else will change. You'll keep choosing the same patterns, same people, same pain. Not because you want to, but because the vow won't let you stop. So ask yourself, what promise did you make in silence? What did you vow to be, or not be, in order to survive? And are you still keeping it, even though it's killing you? Because until you break the contract you never signed, you'll never be free. And once you realize just how many of your decisions have been dictated by invisible agreements, you'll start to see the world differently.